Chapter 228. The three great experts let out a cry of disbelief. It was no wonder that they were so shocked. If it were anyone else, they would be dumbfounded for a moment, unable to wrap their heads around it. It was just a remote mountain village, but the village chief was a divine dwelling stage expert. No one would believe it, and they would be laughed at to death. However, such an absurd scene was truly displayed in front of their eyes. This, impossible, how is this possible, divine dwelling stage? Qin Baijian was dumbfounded. In the Saint Yuan dynasty, divine dwelling stage experts were generally concentrated in the 7 great forces. Unaffiliated divine dwelling stage experts were extremely rare, and almost impossible to meet. So over time, heaven and earth spirit bridge experts could run amok in the Saint Yuan dynasty. This also cultivated the arrogant temperament of the Qin Baijian trio. As long as they did not provoke the 7 great forces, no one could do anything to them. However, when they saw Long Yuan, even if they were unwilling to admit it, they could only accept it because they could not see the depth of Long Yuan's strength. Moreover, he walked through the void. It was obvious that he could only be a divine dwelling stage expert. If it were only Aunt Feng Jiao and Lang Li Hua, the 3 of them might still be able to continue to be strong. After all, they had the advantage of numbers. But when the dragon abyss appeared, the 3 of them became existences like a joke. You want to massacre the village? Long Yuan's deep eyes gradually surged with coldness. Lotus Village could be said to be the last harbor for all the clansmen. Qin Baijian's words had undoubtedly touched Long Yuan's reverse scale. No. No. Village chief, this is a misunderstanding. Even the Qin clan's warlord, who had always had a strong character, was stuttering at this moment. His voice was incomparably dry, and his back was covered in cold sweat. At the same time, he regretted saying such arrogant words before investigating the situation clearly. Village chief, don't let them go. My family's Huzi has been seriously injured by them. A middle-aged woman hugged an unconscious young man and shouted. It was the qi-refining young man who had been beaten to the point of vomiting blood. My husband too. Another woman hugged the divine soul realm expert as she wailed incessantly. Long Yuan's eyes turned completely cold. Misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. I only want Yiguchen's life. Mo Yunzi's forehead was drenched in cold sweat as he pointed at Yiguchen. Yiguchen frowned. He really did not have much of a relationship with Lotus Village. If Long Yuan handed him over, it was also reasonable. But Long Yuan only glanced at Yiguchen indifferently and said, if I hand you over, who can find the medicine for Jianshi? Moreover, Jianshi protected you with her life. I won't push you into a pit of fire. Thank you, village chief. Yiguchen cupped his fists in gratitude. I will not hand over Yiguchen, Long Yuan said with a wave of his sleeve. You should know that it's not only the 3 of us who want Yiguchen's life, but also the Limitless Sword Sect. If you don't let him go and provoke the Limitless Sword Sect, Mo Yunzi's hatred for Yiguchen was monstrous. Seeing that Long Yuan was protecting Yiguchen, he could no longer tolerate it. His tone was extremely cold as he mentioned the Limitless Sword Sect. Not good. When Mo Yunzi said this, Qin Baijian and Spring Cloud Pavilion Master both turned pale and cursed in their hearts. What Limitless Sword Sect? I don't know, but I do know that you are threatening our village. Long Yuan's tone was completely gloomy. Mo Yunzi had touched his bottom line. At this moment, another person stepped into the air outside the village. How dare you be so presumptuous in our village? The person who stepped into the air was a rather sturdy middle-aged man. He was bare-chested and carried a large black hammer on his back. His iron-like muscles were bulging, and there was a metallic smell on his body. It's another divine dwelling stage expert. The minds of Qin Baijian and the others went blank. Their breathing almost stopped, and cold sweat constantly poured out from their bodies. What kind of sin had they committed to provoke such a terrifying village? They wanted to cry but had no tears. Gui Fu, You're back. Long Yuan nodded. There's a metallic smell on his body. From the looks of it, he should be a blacksmith, Ye Guchen thought to himself. He vaguely remembered that Su Jianshi had also mentioned this man and called him Uncle Gui Fu. I've only been out exploring the mine for less than a month, and someone has already come looking for trouble. They even dare to threaten to massacre the village. The burly man called Gui Fu stared at Qin Baijian and the others with an unfriendly gaze. Let's go. Qin Baijian and the others were completely afraid. They were afraid that if they didn't leave, another divine dwelling stage expert would appear out of nowhere. If that happened, they would be in big trouble. Gui Fu, let's attack together and restrain them. Long Yuan also moved. In truth, if Qin Baijian and the others weren't so overbearing and didn't threaten to massacre the village, perhaps Long Yuan and the others wouldn't have taken such a drastic action. But not only did they threaten to massacre the village, Mo Yunzi even mentioned the Limitless Sword sect. This touched Long Yuan's bottom line. Their village couldn't be known by too many outsiders, let alone a large faction. Bang! 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 There was no suspense. Just a divine dwelling stage expert was enough to crush Qin Baijian and the others, let alone Gui Fu. Not only that, the hot-tempered Ant Feng Jiao and Lang Lihua also attacked. For a time, Qin Baijian and the other two were beaten up viciously, causing them to vomit blood repeatedly. Especially Ant Feng Jiao. When she saw Mo Yunzi being forced back by Long Yuan, she also sent a slap towards Mo Yunzi's old face. With a smack, Mo Yunzi was sent flying, and several of his blood-stained teeth fell out. I'll beat you to death, you old bastard. How dare you threaten our village? You don't know how to write the word, death. Ant Feng Jiao seemed to be still angry. She sent out a few more slaps, causing Mo Yunzi to see stars. His head was spinning, and his mouth was full of blood. Although they were all Spirit Bridge stage experts, their battle power had plummeted under Long Yuan and Gui Fu's heavy injuries. They couldn't withstand the attacks of Ant Feng Jiao and Lang Lihua. On the other side, Lang Lihua wretchedly kicked the Spring Cloud Pavilion Master's plump buttocks. Damn, it feels much better than my tigress, Lang Lihua whispered. Ah! The Spring Cloud Pavilion Master's face was dripping blood. As a Pavilion Master, she had never been humiliated like this. She was so angry that she vomited a mouthful of blood. Looking at the miserable state of the three great experts, even Ye Guchen covered his eyes with his hand. He couldn't bear to look. An hour later, in Lotus Village. The high and mighty, overbearing three great experts had their cultivation bases sealed by the Dragon Abyss at this moment. Their faces were covered in dirt, and their bodies were covered in wounds. The Qin clan's warlord's eyes were black from the beating. Mo Yunzi's sagging old face was swollen and tight. The Spring Cloud Pavilion Master was also in a sorry state. Her buttocks were still hurting, and she was gnashing her teeth in hatred. The most hateful thing was that they were tied up by chains covered in spiritual inscriptions. They fell to the ground like three livestock. I'm the Mo clan's patriarch, and I'm under the orders of the Limitless Sword sect. How dare you do this to protect Ye Guchen? You must all die. Mo Yunzi was the most senior among the three, and he was the one who flaunted his seniority the most. Being treated like this made him angry. Especially when Ye Guchen was still standing at the side, quietly watching their miserable state. This made Mo Yunzi so angry that his internal organs were burning, and smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. The pursuit this time was simply a double loss for him. Old fart, you still have so much to say. Ant Feng Jiao was merciless. She stomped on Mo Yunzi's old face, stomping his head into the mud. How pitiful. Even Ye Guchen, who was always serious, couldn't help but sigh when he saw this. Chapter 229. After Qin Baijian and the rest were taught a lesson, the villagers began to discuss how to deal with them. This caused the hearts of the three great experts to be extremely uneasy. They were used to being high and mighty, holding the power of life and death in their hands. It was ironic that their lives were in the hands of others. Even Mo Yunzi, who had a cold temper and a vicious heart, kept his mouth shut at this moment. He didn't dare to say anything else as he was afraid that Aunt Feng Jiao would trample on him again. Village chief, we definitely can't let them go. If we let them go, they will definitely report to those powers. When that time comes, our village will no longer be peaceful. We might even run the risk of being discovered. Aunt Feng Jiao said. Yes, we can't let them go. Long Yuan nodded. Hearing this, Qin Baijian and the other two's faces turned ashen. They were filled with regret. If possible, they would never chase after Yi Guchen again. Village chief, I have a suggestion. The green-black ox is tired from plowing the fields every day. Why don't we let the middle-aged man and the green-black ox take turns plowing the fields? Flower in the Waves suggested. That's a good idea. Long Yuan nodded. Instead of killing the three, they might as well make use of the trash. What? Qin Baijian was stunned. He was the warlord of a super family. How could he be reduced to plowing the fields with an ox? He could not accept this. If this news were to spread, it would shake the entire Saint Origin dynasty. His reputation as the warlord of the Qin clan would be ruined. If that's the case, I want that old man. Let him dig the mines. Ghost Axe said in a muffled voice. Mo Yunzi was also dumbfounded. He was the patriarch of the Mo clan and a spiritual bridge expert. How could he be forced to dig the mines? As for this little girl, she has a big butt. She can contribute to the population of the village. Flower in the Waves' saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth. There was a wretched light in his eyes. Say that again. Aunt Feng Jiao pulled Lang Li Hua's ear and gave it a hard pinch. Ouch! Wife, it hurts. Stop! Flower in the Waves cried out in pain. When Spring Cloud Pavilion Master heard Flower in the Waves' words, she was so scared that her face turned pale. Let her go to the fields to plant the spiritual herbs. Long Yuan waved his hand. Because Long Yuan had planted a seal in the bodies of the three great powerhouses, he was not afraid that they would resist or escape. Yi Guchen finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the ashen faces of the three powerhouses. All this time, the three powerhouses were like a rock that weighed heavily on his heart. Although it couldn't be said that he was afraid of them, he still felt a lot of pressure. At this moment, Yi Guchen also felt a lot more relaxed when he saw them being suppressed. Yi Guchen, you have yet to recover from your injuries. Here are a few pills for you. You can leave after you recover. As for what happened in Lotus Village, I hope you won't tell anyone. Long Yuan said as he took out a jade bottle. Yi Guchen nodded and accepted the jade bottle. This Lotus Village was full of mysteries. Yi Guchen always felt that Long Yuan and the others had an extraordinary background. Moreover, Su Jianche's background was a mystery. Yi Guchen didn't see her parents in the village. However, Yi Guchen knew that as an outsider, he wasn't qualified to inquire too much. As for these secrets, if Su Jianche woke up in the future and was willing to, she would naturally tell him. This made Yi Guchen even more determined to find the sacred medicine. After dealing with the three powerhouses, Yi Guchen wanted to return to the Sword Heart Spring to heal. However, just as Yi Guchen stepped into the valley, he suddenly saw a black-clothed youth standing in front of the unconscious Su Jianche. The youth had a handsome figure and well-defined facial features. However, his face was expressionless and carried a hint of coldness. It was a natural cold temperament. He looked at the unconscious Su Jianche and the coldness in his eyes melted away, leaving behind only helplessness and pity. I told you not to enter the world, but you insisted, could that be? Yi Guchen looked at the black-clothed youth and guessed. The black-clothed youth's perception was very sharp. He immediately sensed Yi Guchen's arrival. 2 bolts of cold lightning shot out from his eyes. In the next moment, his figure blurred. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Yiguchen and pushed out a palm. Yiguchen was slightly surprised. He didn't expect the youth to attack him the moment he saw him. Yiguchen used the wave-like subtle steps. His chi was sealed, so he couldn't use his true chi to activate his movement technique. His speed was also reduced. He could only use his physical strength to activate his movement technique. Bang! Yiguchen was pushed back by the palm. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He had yet to recover from his injuries and couldn't fight. Sumoyan. Yiguchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and stared at the black-clothed youth. You didn't even use your true chi. Are you looking down on me? The youth named Sumoyan frowned. Yiguchen had a rough idea of his cultivation. He was in the Divine Soul Realm. Sumoyan was a young expert in the Divine Soul Realm. His strength wasn't any weaker than the elite disciples of the 7 major factions. Moreover, from Sumoyan's movement technique and palm strike, it could be seen that he wasn't a youth from the mountains. He was more like an elite disciple from an aristocratic family. I'm seriously injured. For some reason, I can't use my true chi. May I ask if you're Su Jianshurs? Yiguchen said in a serious tone. Big brother. Sumoyan's gaze was cold. He had a cold temperament. No wonder, Yiguchen thought to himself. If he were Su Jianshur's big brother, he wouldn't be able to resist the urge to attack. No matter what, it was his fault that Su Jianshur was seriously injured and unconscious. I'll find the sacred medicine myself. There's no need for you to do anything. How can someone who can't even take a palm from me be worthy of my little sister? Sumoyan's tone was cold. He seemed to be an arrogant person. Seeing that Yiguchen was seriously injured and couldn't use his true chi, he didn't bother to attack. When my little sister wakes up, she'll have a broader world in the future. As for you, you can't even surpass me. How can you keep up with my little sister's footsteps? Sumoyan frowned as if he looked down on Yiguchen. However, Yiguchen did look weak right now. His chi was sealed by the spirit-devouring insect. He couldn't even release his true chi. Naturally, he didn't have any aura to speak of. Who can say for sure what the future holds? Everyone is qualified to step on the path to the peak. Yiguchen wasn't worried about his future at all. He had the heart of a powerhouse. Foolish confidence. If you can't even surpass me, then don't have any contact with my little sister in the future. Sumoyan said coldly, then left. Yiguchen didn't care about Sumoyan's arrogance. He could feel that Sumoyan truly cared about Su Jianshur. Unfortunately, he was wrong about Yiguchen. No matter what, strength is still the most important. I'm only a bit away from the enlightened sword heart. The sword heart spring is filled with Tao rhymes and is suitable for comprehending the Tao. Then, I'll break through to the enlightened sword heart here. Yiguchen made up his mind and entered the sword heart spring. He sat cross-legged not far from the sleeping Su Jianshur. He closed his eyes, and as if his mind and spirit were one, he began to comprehend. Chapter 230. Yiguchen's sword Tao heavenly capital was extraordinary. In addition to the previous series of encounters in situ Hongshua's incident, his sword heart was even purer and firmer. His life was a sword, and his life was a companion to his sword. How could Yiguchen, who had such awareness, not be able to comprehend the heart of the sword? As Yiguchen closed his eyes, the sword heart seed in his heart trembled as if it was fusing with the sword Tao rhyme here. At this moment, the ancient sword that was stabbed into the cliff also started humming. At the same time, in the heart of the unconscious Su Jianshur, the golden sword shadow seemed to appear again. If it wasn't for the seal of the golden rune chains, it would have definitely escaped again. Vaguely, Yiguchen's mind seemed to be wandering in the netherworld. He seemed to see a holy sword emitting a golden brilliance, manifesting in the chaos of the netherworld. That sword had a supreme aura. It was as if he was facing the heavenly Tao, Mother Earth, and human emperor. In front of this golden holy sword, all other swords submitted. That sword is... Yi Guqin's mind wandered, and he was shocked. As a sword cultivator, he could naturally feel the supreme power contained in that sword. This feeling could only be compared to the devil's sword that swallowed heaven and earth in the memory of the heaven-swallowing beast's demon core. Could this golden holy sword be a famed primordial sword? Yi Guqin was astonished. Then, he saw a shocking scene. The golden holy sword seemed to disintegrate in the void, turning into 3 streams of light that scattered into the void, disappearing without a trace. How is this possible? How can a famed primordial sword be split into 3? Yi Guqin was puzzled. However, as if he had seen the existence of a famed primordial sword again, his sword heart became even more transparent and intelligent. The entire sword heart spring began to churn again. The ancient sword trembled, and Tao rhyme filled the air. On a cliff far away from the sword heart spring, Long Yuan, Gue Fu, and Su Moyan stood quietly. That little fellow is somewhat incredible, to actually be able to cause that sword to resonate. Ghost Axe's eyes revealed a look of surprise. His talent in swordsmanship is indeed rare, but I can't feel his genuine qi. Long Yuan was puzzled. Without true qi, he's just a cripple. Could it be that Uncle Long Yuan still expects him to help little sister? Su Moyan's tone was still cold. This time, the seal in Jian Shi's heart broke and leaked that kind of aura. If they find out, Long Yuan's face was filled with deep worry as he sighed. I will protect my little sister, Su Moyan said coldly. Sigh, I hope they won't come looking for us. Long Yuan and Gue Fu looked at each other and sighed. On the other side, Yi Guqin, who was sitting cross-legged in the sword heart spring, had a crack appear in the sword heart seed in his heart. Then, golden roots appeared and took root in Yi Guqin's heart. This proved that the sword heart seed had taken root, and Yi Guqin's realm of swordsmanship had completely stepped into the heart integrated into sword. At this moment, Yi Guqin felt that his mind was extremely clear, like a mirror that had been wiped clean. The swordsmanship in the past seemed to have transformed into figures in his mind, constantly practicing swordsmanship. This was the benefit of the heart integrated into sword. All kinds of complicated and difficult swordsmanship could be deduced in his mind. To put it bluntly, if there was a Xiantian swordsmanship in front of Yi Guqin now, in just a few days, he could cultivate it to the highest realm, which was the transformative realm. Even if it was a higher level of spiritual level swordsmanship, it wouldn't take much time to comprehend it. This was the strength of the heart integrated into sword. Although it wasn't of much help in combat, it had a unique advantage in cultivating various cultivation methods and swordsmanship. Slowly opening his eyes, Yi Guqin's eyes were filled with joy. He had already reached the heart integrated into sword, and the next realm was to become one with the sword. This was the realm where Feng Manlu was at. However, it wasn't easy to reach this realm. Even Feng Manlu had only comprehended it after 10 years of seclusion in the sword sect pagoda. But if he could reach this realm, it would be of great help to Yi Guqin. If the heart integrated into sword was in terms of comprehension, then becoming one with the sword was in terms of combat. After comprehending the heart integrated into sword, Yi Guqin would definitely crush experts of the same level if they didn't have special talents or powerful trump cards. For example, although Feng Manlu was also a heaven and earth spirit bridge, it wouldn't take him much effort to kill Qin Baijian and the other two. I've already comprehended the heart integrated into sword. As for becoming one with the sword, I'm not in a hurry, Yi Guqin thought to himself. Comprehending the realm of swordsmanship required accumulation and opportunity. It couldn't be rushed. With Yi Guqin's temperament, he wouldn't be rash. He then looked at Su Jianshi with a gentle gaze. I'll find the sacred medicine, and I'll make Gu Shaoyang pay for what he did. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed coldly. No matter what, Gu Shaoyang was his mortal enemy. Even if he had the starry sword pavilion behind him, Yi Guqin wasn't afraid. Yi Guqin had to get the innate sword embryo back. It was too important to him. I'll leave after 2 more days of recuperation, Yiguchen thought to himself. Even with the healing pills given by Jun Xiaoyao and Long Yuan, it would still take some time for him to recover from such severe injuries. Moreover, Yiguchen's sea of qi was sealed by the spirit-devouring insect. The insect kept absorbing his spiritual qi in his sea of qi. At the same time, the star patterns on his back became more and more dense. If it were an ordinary sea of qi, it would have been sucked dry by the insect. However, Yiguchen's sea of qi recovered very quickly. Therefore, even if the insect kept absorbing his spiritual qi, it wouldn't be able to suck it dry. Yiguchen even felt that with the help of his golden genuine qi, the venomous insect would undergo unpredictable changes. Although I can't use spiritual qi, the indestructible Vajra body alone is enough to fight against ordinary divine soul realm cultivators, Yiguchen thought to himself. The indestructible Vajra body allowed him to fight against spiritual weapons with his bare hands. His physical strength was limitless, and he could fight against divine soul realm cultivators. In the following days, Yiguchen recovered from his injuries in the Sword Heart Spring. At the same time, he was curious about the ancient sword on the cliff. There must be a big secret hidden within. However, Yiguchen could not associate this quaint sword with the golden holy sword that carried the pressure of the immemorial sword in his consciousness. The golden sword shadow in Su Jianchu's heart also had a secret. However, Yiguchen couldn't figure it out at the moment, so he could only give up on it. Apart from healing, Yiguchen would also walk around Lotus Village. As they gradually became familiar with each other, Yiguchen also got along well with the villagers due to his indifferent temperament. Occasionally, Yiguchen would go to some remote places to look at the scenery and cleanse his sword heart. However, Yiguchen accidentally discovered that there was a kind of pressure that made his heart palpitate faintly from the back mountain of the village. That faint pressure piqued Yiguchen's curiosity, so he decided to ascend the mountain to investigate. Just as Yiguchen was about to ascend the cliff, he suddenly heard a sharp voice that sounded like a crow whispering. "Sigh, life is as lonely as snow. Every day, I can only stand on the peak and look down at the other mountains. I already understand what it means to be lonely as an expert." Hearing this, the corner of Yiguchen's eyes twitched. Could it be that the extreme pressure he felt before was emitted by the owner of this voice? Yiguchen approached again and climbed up the cliff. When he took a look, he was a little stunned. Chapter 231. What appeared in Yiguchen's vision was not a cold and arrogant peerless master. Instead, it was a eagle. Yiguchen deliberately took a closer look, and then he was completely sure that the sharp voice like that of a male duck came from the eagle in front of him. The eagle stood upright, about the height of a person, covered with thick feathers, like gold with a metallic luster, grayish-brown in color. At this moment, the eagle had a pair of wings, like a human's arms behind its back, and its sharp claws scratched on the rock. The eagle raised its head and stared into the distance. If one ignored the identity of the eagle, it did have the temperament of a peerless master. "This is a sand eagle." Yiguchen could not help but be surprised. The grayish-brown eagle in front of him was the same as the flying demonic beast called the sand eagle, and this kind of eagle was generally a third-rank demonic beast. However, the sand eagle in front of him was obviously emitting the aura of a fourth-rank demonic beast. What did Grandpa Eagle hear? "Sand eagle, you are the sand eagle, your whole family are sand eagles." The eagle's perception was very sharp. When it heard Yiguchen's whisper, it could not maintain the calm temperament of a master. It turned its head and stared at Yiguchen fiercely, and then its eyes were stunned. "You are not a villager." The sand eagle was stunned. The sand eagle can talk, and has such spiritual intelligence. Yiguchen was surprised. Even some fifth-rank demonic beasts may not be as eloquent as the eagle in front of him, and have such spiritual intelligence. "What, you dare to insult Grandpa Eagle?" Grandpa Eagle has the blood of the immemorial golden-winged rock flowing in his body. "I am the king of eagles, the divine eagle." "Boy, If you dare to call me Sand Eagle again, I will kill you. The divine eagle seemed to be furious, flapping its wings and raising a gust of wind, with a threatening face. Looking at the divine eagle, Yiguchin did not know why, but he felt a sense of familiarity and nostalgia. He did not even care about the threats of the eagle, and his eyes seemed to show a trace of reminiscence. Can I call you Brother Eagle? Yiguchin said with a faint smile. This. The eagle looked at Yiguchin with a puzzled look. The nostalgia in Yiguchin's eyes made it puzzled. The divine condor paused for a moment, and then said, Brother Condor, this form of address is not bad. The fact that Yiguchin called him Brother Condor proved that in Yiguchin's eyes, it was not just a condor, but an existence of the same level. Speaking of which, kid, why haven't I seen you before? Are you an outsider? The divine condor asked. Yiguchin nodded and said, Why is Brother Condor here? Nothing much, just guarding the door. Seeing Yiguchin's sincere attitude, the divine condor suddenly felt that this human kid was rather pleasing to the eye. Hearing the divine condor's words, Yiguchin suddenly looked behind the divine condor. Indeed, there was a deep cave. The pressure that he had felt earlier had come from this cave. Kid, don't go in out of curiosity. That's the forbidden area of the Lotus Village, the divine condor said. Sure. Yiguchin was not the kind of person who could not resist the urge to go in. But I'm tired of staying here every day. Besides, even if I'm not guarding this place, nothing will happen. Kid, are you going to leave the village in the future? The divine condor suddenly asked. Of course, Yiguchin said. That's good. I'm bored and want to go out for a walk. How about I follow you? The divine condor chirped. Is it okay? Yiguchin hesitated. He did not want to take the divine condor away unknowingly. If Long Yuan and the others asked, it would be difficult to answer. It's okay. Long Yuan and the others can't control me. I can go wherever I want. Kid, are you willing? The divine condor chirped. With Brother Condor's company, of course. Yiguchin nodded. This divine condor always reminded him of his old friend. I wonder if it's doing well. Is it lonely living alone on the mountain peak? Yiguchin sighed. Then, the divine condor followed Yiguchin down the mountain. According to Yiguchin's estimation, this divine condor was roughly equivalent to a fourth-rank demon beast, which was the equivalent of a human divine soul expert. Of course, as for the divine condor's combat strength, Yiguchin did not consider it. But Yiguchin admired its eloquence. When Yiguchin appeared in the village with the divine condor, many villagers looked at Yiguchin in surprise. Long Yuan and Ghost Hatchet, two people, even revealed astonished looks. The divine condor has chosen a master. Gue Fu whispered. That person once said that if the divine condor was willing to leave in the future, we would let it go. But I didn't expect it to choose Yiguchin. Long Yuan was also surprised. Long Yuan, I'm tired of staying here. You don't mind if I go out for a walk with this kid, right? The divine condor stared at Long Yuan. As you wish, Long Yuan said. For the next 2 days, Yiguchin recuperated in the Sword Heart Spring, refining the Great Jade Spirit Recovery Pill and Long Yuan's pills into his body. To Yiguchin's surprise, Long Yuan had someone deliver 2 fruits from the Spirit Cornucopia tree. That was a sage to be, and such treatment made Yiguchin very puzzled. But then, he thought that it might be because of the divine condor. 2 days later, with the help of pills and quasi-divine herbs, Yiguchin's heavy injuries were more or less healed. Although he still couldn't use his Sea of Qi, his physical strength was perfect. The power he could erupt with was enough to shake a divine soul expert. At the entrance of the village, Yiguchin bid farewell to the group. Big brother, Shui-er wants to go with you. Shui-er hugged Yiguchin's waist, her eyes red with reluctance. Stay here and accompany Su Jianshi. I'll come back in the future. Yi Guqin patted Shuai-er's head. He was going to go to the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, so there would be a lot of battles. Moreover, he had offended the Limitless Sword Sect. If he brought Shuai-er with him, she would be in danger. Thus, Yi Guqin decided to let Shuai-er stay in Lotus Village. Shuai-er, come with me. We'll pick mushrooms and pine cones together. Su Qiqiao held Shuai-er's hand. Big brother, you must come back. Shuai said with a sobbing tone. Yi Guqin nodded. Yi Guqin, remember, you only have 1 year to find the saint herbs. Long Yuan reminded again. I understand. I'll bring them back within a year. Yi Guqin solemnly cupped his fists. Among the crowd, a cold glint looked at Yi Guqin. It was Su Moyan. His expression was as cold as ever. He didn't think Yi Guqin could complete the task and bring back the saint herbs. Yi Guqin didn't say anything. He would prove it with his actions when the time came. All right, little Yi, let's go. The divine condor impatiently flapped its wings. After bidding farewell, Yi Guqin also left Lotus Village. He found the azure sky eagle a dozen miles away. Because it was Feng Manlu's mount, Qin Baijian and the others didn't have the courage to kill it. Yi Guqin sat on the azure sky eagle. To his surprise, the divine condor also sat on the eagle's back. The azure sky eagle immediately let out a dissatisfied cry. They were both flying beasts, so why did it have to carry the divine condor? What are you yelling for? It's your honor to have Grandpa Condor sit on you. Hurry up and fly. The divine condor cawed and flapped its wings arrogantly. Yi Guqin looked at the divine condor with a faint smile. It seemed that cultivation in the future wouldn't be too boring. He looked into the distance, as if deep in thought. The Sword Sect's Tower Forest. Let me see how you became the holy land of sword cultivators. Chapter 232. Just as Yi Guqin was about to leave Lotus Village. Far away from the Saint Origin dynasty, there was a mysterious place somewhere far away. There was a mountain peak that was shaped like a heavenly sword. It was more than 10,000 feet tall and towered into the depths of the sky. At the peak of the mountain, one could reach out and touch the clouds. Looking down, one would feel like they were at the top of the world. There was a futon on the peak of the mountain. A young man was sitting cross-legged on the futon. The young man had his eyes closed as if he was meditating. He had long golden hair and wore a simple and loose white robe. His skin was like jade and shone brightly. He was also very handsome, although he couldn't compare to Jun Xiaoyao. However, he had a temperament that even Jun Xiaoyao didn't have. That was perfection. From head to toe, from inside to outside, he gave off a sense of harmony and perfection. Whether it was his facial features or his body proportions, they all seemed to have been carefully sculpted by the heavens. Not a bit more or less. This near-perfect temperament made the young man feel like he was an immortal. People with such a perfect temperament were very rare. They had another name in the Nantian domain. 10th grade supreme genius. At a certain moment, the young man with golden hair slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were silver in color, and there were dense runes flowing within his pupils, giving him a strange sense of beauty. Golden hair, silver eyes, perfect temperament, a natural-born god. Around the young man, an illusory true dragon vaguely appeared. If Yi Guqin were here, he would find that the illusory true dragon was formed by sword qi. At the same time, a golden sword shadow appeared between the young man's eyebrows. It emitted a faint light as if it was attracted and resonated with something. This golden sword shadow was 70% similar to the sword shadow in Su Jianchu's heart. The young man seemed surprised as he looked in a certain direction. Found it. The young man let out a faint smile. Behind the young man, an old man in a white robe appeared out of nowhere. His aura was dense. Old Qiu, I sense the aura of that sword, said the man with golden hair and silver eyes. Young master, are you going to retrieve that sword? The white-robed elder named Elder Chiu asked. Not for now. My true dragon sword Dao is at a critical stage of cultivation. I can't be distracted for now. I'll have to trouble Elder Chiu to make a trip there and find out the situation first, the young man said calmly. It's my honor to be of service to you, young master. Old Chiu cupped his hands respectfully. The aura of that sword is in that direction. The young man pointed. He was pointing in the direction of the Saint Origin dynasty. Yes, this old man will definitely help young master get that sword back. Old Chiu cupped his hands again and stepped into the void. His aura spread out. He was a celestial palace venerable. A venerable was as humble as a servant to this young man. Looking at old Chiu's departing figure, the young man revealed a faint smile. I am a 10th rank heaven's chosen supreme, born to uphold the great fortune of heaven and earth. I ride the clouds and ride the true dragon, destined to dominate the ups and downs of a region. Whatever I want, it will never escape from my grasp, whether it's the sword sect's inheritance or that sword. The golden-haired, silver-eyed man smiled. On the back of his hand, a green sword-shaped emblem appeared. It was the emblem of the 9th generation sword sect. With old Chiu's departure, a vague storm seemed to be brewing in Lotus Village. At this moment, Yiguchen was riding the azure sky eagle with the divine condor, flying in the sky. He didn't go to the sword sect pagoda forest first, but returned to the Tianhuang plains. Yiguchen didn't forget his promise with Situ Hongxue. When they were about to reach the location, Yiguchen rode the azure sky eagle and slowly descended. The plains were swept by the wind and sand. Where was the beauty? Seeing this, Yiguchen sighed softly. He had expected this, but he didn't expect it to be true. She was gone, but there seemed to be a wisp of fragrance lingering in the air. Yiguchen felt a little melancholy. He suddenly saw something buried in the yellow sand. He went forward and picked it up. It was the hairpin he gave to Situ Hongxue. A line of words was engraved on the hairpin. If the heavens had feelings, they would also grow old. Yiguchen stared at the hairpin for a long time. Vaguely, the beauty's voice and smile seemed to appear in front of his eyes. Then, Yiguchen held the hairpin in one hand, and the meteor's soft sword suddenly appeared in the other hand. Yiguchen closed his eyes. Seeing Yiguchen in this state, the divine condor tactfully didn't disturb him and watched quietly. Because he had just broken through to the heart integrated into sword not long ago, and Yiguchen was feeling emotional at this moment. For a moment, Yiguchen's thoughts surged into his mind as he came to a realization. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, Yiguchen stood in the sandstorm like this, holding the sword in one hand and the hairpin in the other, for half a day. However, even Yiguchen didn't know that on the other side of the void, a figure was watching Yiguchen with his hands behind his back. He was wearing plain clothes that had been washed so many times that they were white. His handsome face was obviously Feng Manlu. Although he was blind, he could sense the aura of Yiguchen's sword intent. There was a hint of satisfaction on his face. After a long time, Yiguchen finally moved. He made a sword move. This sword move wasn't fast. In fact, it could even be called slow. And the sword light wasn't sharp. It was like a lover's hand gently caressing his cheek. However, it was this slow and gentle sword move that made the divine condor, who was not far away, a little nervous. This sword move is so terrifying. The divine condor's feathers stood on end, as if it was frightened. It was a 4th-rank demonic beast, comparable to a divine soul expert. Even it said such words. It was obvious how powerful Yiguchen's sword move was. However, not only that, the moment Yiguchen made a sword move, a kind of sad and beautiful sword intent spread out. This kind of sad intent was like Situ Hongxue's sadness and determination. It was so sad and beautiful that it made people cry. This was the same as the Eye of Azura. It was a method to affect the soul. However, the Eye of Azura created many terrifying illusions. This sword move, on the other hand, used sad emotions to shake people's hearts. It was conceivable that if Yi Gu-chin used this sword during a battle, he would be able to kill Yi Gu-chin. His opponent's mind would be affected, and it would be easier to defeat him. After the sword move, Yi Gu-chin sighed slightly. This was the sword move that Yi Gu-chin created after coming to this world. There was only one move. However, this move was enough to amaze people. If this spread out, it would definitely shock everyone. Creating a sword move was not something that anyone could do. Only a few great grandmasters who had been immersed in the way of the sword for many years could do it. Moreover, there were different levels of self-created sword moves. It was easy to create a sword move below the innate stage. However, Yi Gu-chin's move was obviously very powerful. It also had a soul technique, and it was definitely not weaker than a spirit-level sword move. A 17-year-old chi refinement cultivator creating a spirit-level sword move. If this spread out, a group of sword Dao grandmasters would be shocked to death. Moreover, Yi Gu-chin knew that because his sea of chi was sealed, this sword move was only in its embryonic form. When it was perfected in the future, its power would be even more amazing. Situ Hongxue, is this your final gift to me? Although he had created a sword move, Yi Gu-chin was not very excited. He was just a little melancholic. Not bad. What is the name of your sword move? Suddenly, a figure flew over from the distance. Yi Gu-chin raised his eyebrows and looked over. It was Feng Manlu. This sword move is called Merciless Heavens. Yi Gu-chin paused for a moment and said, if the heavens had emotions, the heavens would also age. This sword move was called Merciless Heavens. Chapter 233. Sentimental Heavens, a good name. Your self-created sword move is not bad. Feng Manlu nodded slightly. One must know that he was a legend of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, a former divine dwelling stage sword king. There were countless genius sword cultivators in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, but none of them were praised by Feng Manlu. Yi Gu-chin smiled faintly and said, Elder Feng, you flatter me. I've already killed the black dragon python in your honorable realm's cave abode, Feng Manlu said in a casual tone. Yi Gu-chin's eyes suddenly lit up. He was also very curious about the opportunity behind the blood-colored door in the venerable cave dwelling. Subsequently, Yi Gu-chin and the divine condor followed Feng Manlu to the ancient stone forest. I've already destroyed the maze outside for you. You can enter directly, Feng Manlu said. Thank you, Elder. But I've offended the Limitless Sword Sect. Yi Gu-chin hesitated. He alone might not be able to protect the venerable cave dwelling. Moreover, there might be others who would enter to search for opportunities. That's easy, Feng Manlu said as he slowly raised his hand. An incomparably majestic wave of true qi gushed out, accompanied by sword qi that could split the sky and earth. It gathered in Feng Manlu's hand. In the end, it turned into a transparent lotus flower under Yi Gu-chin's shocked gaze. Yes, it was a lotus flower. Moreover, every petal of the lotus flower was formed by stacking sword qi. This was something that could only be done by someone with extremely high attainments in the sword Dao. Feng Manlu flicked his finger and threw the lotus flower out. The sword lotus grew rapidly in the wind, turning into a huge sword qi lotus flower that enveloped the entire ancient stone forest. This move. Yi Gu-chin's eyes were filled with astonishment. It was not only because of the power of this move, but also because it gave him an incomparably familiar feeling. The Sword Sect's secret technique. Yi Gu-chin was very certain that this move belonged to the Sword Sect's secret technique. Every secret technique of the Sword Sect was incomparably powerful. 108,000 sword souls, Qian Kun 1 sacred sword, sun beheading brilliant void sword qi, and Feng Manlu's ultimate technique. Yi Gu-chin was becoming more and more interested in the so-called Sword Sect legacy. This move is called the Reincarnation Sword Lotus, and it's an ultimate technique recorded on the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda. Of course, the move I executed isn't complete, and only the top level of the Sword Sect Pagoda should have a complete Reincarnation Sword Lotus. However, this move of mine has enveloped the entire stone forest. Other than you, it will be difficult for anyone else to enter, unless it is a divine dwelling stage expert. But even if that is the case, I will still be able to sense it. Feng Manlu said slowly. Yi Guqin was slightly delighted. If that was the case, he would not have to worry about the Venerable One's cave being coveted by outsiders. Furthermore, Yi Guqin was also very interested in the Sword Sect's ultimate technique, the Reincarnation Sword Lotus. It seems that I must challenge the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest when I reach it, Yi Guqin thought. Feng Manlu waved his hand and said, "All right, I'll take my leave first. You can return to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest after you find an opportunity." Yi Guqin cupped his fists together and said, "Thank you, Elder Feng. If Elder Feng needs any help in the future, please don't hesitate to ask." He did not think that Feng Manlu was so generous to him just because he was an inner courtyard disciple of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Feng Manlu could not help but shake his head and laugh when he heard Yi Guqin's words. "Smart Junior, I do have something that I need your help with in the future, but let's talk about it after you return to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest." Feng Manlu waved his hand. "Then I'll go in first." Yi Guqin nodded and entered the stone forest without any obstruction. Feng Manlu looked at Yi Guqin's back, and there seemed to be light flickering in his empty black eyes. "I've been in closed-door cultivation in the Sword Sect Pagoda for 10 years, all for the sake of waiting for someone to take my place and participate in that fated battle. That girl, Shuang, wanted to fight for me many times, but I refused her every time. Yi Guqin, you can't disappoint me." Feng Manlu muttered, then sighed and left with a flick of his sleeve. The Shuang he mentioned was naturally the most dazzling genius of the younger generation in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Yan Wushuang. On the other side, Yi Guqin left the Divine Condor and the Green Sky Eagle outside and entered the Venerable One's cave alone. Along the way, there was no obstruction. He went down into the cave. Although there were no more spiritual herbs in the medicinal field, the spiritual crystal soil was still there and could be used to plant some spiritual herbs. The sword cave was still a place of opportunity for Yi Guqin. He could use it to comprehend and improve his swordsmanship. In addition, there was still some spiritual liquid left in the spiritual liquid pool. After all, the many geniuses fought fiercely and did not give in to each other. It was impossible to take away all the spiritual liquid in the spiritual liquid pool. Yi Guqin took some of the spiritual liquid again in preparation for his future breakthrough. He continued to go deeper and finally arrived at the blood-colored door that he had stopped at before. Before he got close, Yi Guqin smelled a bloody smell. When he got closer, he saw that the ferocious black dragon python was already lying on the ground. Its head and body had been cut in two. The cut was sharp and it was obvious that it was beheaded by a sword. The one who did it was Feng Manlu. It seems that Senior Feng is stronger than I thought. Yi Guqin thought to himself. This peak rank 5 black dragon python was comparable to a heaven and earth spiritual bridge expert. Monsters were always stronger than humans at the same level. If it was someone like Qin Baijian, he would not be a match for the black dragon python in a one-on-one fight. However, Feng Manlu had beheaded it with a single sword. The difference in strength was obvious. This made Yi Guqin even more determined to comprehend the union of man and sword. He approached the black dragon python. Suddenly, the 5-colored golden core in his dantian began to vibrate. The soul star devouring vermin only sealed the sea of qi. The 5-colored golden core was outside the sea of qi, so it was not affected. What's going on? Yi Guqin was surprised. When he encountered the black dragon python, the 5-colored golden core in his body also vibrated strangely. Now, it was happening again. Just as Yi Gu-chen was puzzled, the area where the azure dragon was carved on the five-colored golden core in his body suddenly lit up. Then, a misty green light was emitted from Yi Gu-chen's body and covered the black dragon python. Yi Gu-chen was surprised to see a slightly illusory shadow of the black dragon python being forced out by the green light. It struggled to be dragged into Yi Gu-chen's body. Is that a monster soul? Yi Gu-chen was surprised. A monster's soul was the soul of a monster. Only some high-level monsters had it. Moreover, if one was not proficient in monsters, one would not know how to refine a monster soul. Yi Gu-chen suddenly realized that the barbarian tribe's use of monster souls was far better than human warriors. The most famous totem warriors of the barbarian tribe sealed their monster souls into their own totems. When necessary, they released their monster souls to become a powerful force. The holy sons and holy daughters of the barbarian tribe, who were more respected, used the power of their monster souls and totems to the extreme. Their strength was not inferior to the top geniuses of the 7 major forces. Yi Gu-chen did not expect that the 5-colored golden core he accidentally consumed would have the ability to refine monster souls. Chapter 234. The 5-colored golden core circulated with the azure light. Under Yi Gu-chen's gaze, the illusory demonic soul of the black dragon python was dragged into his dantian. Then, it was completely absorbed by the azure dragon pattern in the 5-colored golden core. In the next moment, Yi Gu-chen felt the 5-colored golden core tremble again, as if it was refining the black dragon python demon's soul. After about half an hour, Yi Gu-chen felt the 5-colored golden core stop trembling. Then, an extremely strange power came out from the azure dragon pattern in the golden core. That power was different from genuine qi or soul power, which made Yi Gu-chen a little confused. The misty azure power came out from Yi Gu-chen's dantian, and then gathered in his left arm. In the end, under Yi Gu-chen's surprised gaze, it gathered into an azure totem. This azure totem was like a coiled azure dragon, and it appeared on Yi Gu-chen's left arm. Yi Gu-chen was curious and wanted to activate this power. In the next moment, the azure dragon totem suddenly emitted azure light, and the rich azure light gathered into a slightly illusory azure dragon claw, which was attached to Yi Gu-chen's arm. At the same time, the fine runes on the 5-colored golden core released light, and information was transmitted to Yi Gu-chen's mind. It turned out that this totem was the wood azure dragon totem. Yi Gu-chen also borrowed the power of the azure dragon totem to be able to form the azure dragon claw. The azure dragon totem was also the top wood attribute totem. After digesting this piece of information, Yi Gu-chen was a little stunned. He did not expect that he would obtain totem power by accident, and it was the top totem. Totem power was a power that only the barbarian tribe could possess. This 5-colored golden core can give people totem power. The barbarian tribe's skeleton must have an extraordinary origin. Yi Gu-chen thought. The barbarian tribe's skeleton in the bottomless demon abyss probably had a greater origin than Yi Gu-chen had imagined. Although he did not know much about the 5 elements barbarian tribe, he knew that the 5 mythological beast totem was the most supreme totem of the barbarian tribe, and it was worshipped by thousands of people. If I can use totem power, does that mean I can blend into the barbarian tribe? Yi Gu-chen suddenly thought of this, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Vaguely, Yi Gu-chen had a plan in his mind. However, Yi Gu-chen's azure dragon totem was far from complete realm, and he could only form the azure dragon claw. Golden core, golden core. For golden core totem, golden core, for other totems golden core. What kind of power will I get if I awakened? Yi Gu-chen was curious and also excited. However, the only way to awaken the totems of the 5 divine beasts was to enter the 5 elemental lands. Because there were many demon beasts in the land of 5 elements, and there were more convenient ways to awaken totems. It seems that whether it's to find the sacred medicine or to awaken the totem, I have to make a trip to the 5 elemental land, Yi Gu-chen thought to himself. After the five-colored golden core absorbed the demonic soul and blood essence of the black dragon python, the black dragon python's corpse shriveled up, as if it had lost all its essence. Although Yiguchen was temporarily unable to use his real chi, he was unexpectedly able to use his totem power. This was also a form of compensation. Yiguchen temporarily put aside the matter of the five-colored golden core. He slowly pushed open the blood-red door and cautiously walked in. The deeper they went, the denser the spirit chi became. Yiguchen's field of vision suddenly widened a little. Looking ahead, he discovered another spirit crystal medicine field. Above the medicinal field, what was planted were actually all supreme-grade precious medicines. Supreme-grade precious medicines were second only to quasi-saint medicines. Although they were not as rare as quasi-saint medicines, they were still very precious. Dragon origin fruit, greenwood spirit vine, soul-nurturing grass. The variety of supreme-grade precious medicines made Yiguchen a little dazzled. That's a branch of the path understanding tree. Yiguchen's gaze suddenly focused on a branch hidden in the middle of the precious medicines. There were a total of 12 leaves faintly glowing with a green light on the branch. They were the path understanding tree leaves. Previously, the 5 path understanding tree leaves had caused many prodigies to fight among themselves. Even Yiguchen had only obtained 1 path understanding tree leaf at that time. But now, there were 12 path understanding tree leaves in front of him. Anyone who saw them would be envious. Yiguchen collected the path understanding tree branches and plucked a portion of the precious medicines, leaving behind a portion for future use. Will there be more opportunities under this medicine field? Yiguchen was curious. He stomped his foot, and the power of his physical body was shocking. His bones rumbled as if dragons were colliding. With a boom, the medicine field was shaken open, and a blood-red figure was revealed below. Yiguchen's gaze focused, and he dragged it out with both hands. At a glance, it was a blood-red puppet. Yiguchen studied the puppet and found a mechanism behind its head. Opening it, a translucent crystal was revealed. There was a hazy blood-red mist circulating inside the crystal. Yiguchen took the crystal and found a miniature array hidden inside. With a thought, he extracted a drop of essence blood from his body and dripped it into the array. Instantly, a wave of information entered Yiguchen's mind. This puppet was called the Blood Cloud Centipede. It was a puppet unique to the Baiming family, one of the 5 overlord families of the South Horizon region. And this crystal with a hazy blood mist was the Demon Cloud Blood Crystal. It was an energy source specifically used to stimulate the Blood Cloud Centipede. This Blood Cloud Centipede is much stronger than the Black Demon puppet from the elite meeting. Its strength is directly proportional to its consumption. If it can only display the strength of a 3rd transformation divine soul, then it can rely on the Demon Cloud Blood Crystal to support itself for a long time. But, the greater its strength, the greater its consumption. Yiguchen thought to himself. He looked around and only found this Demon Cloud Blood Crystal. In other words, Yiguchen couldn't recklessly use the Blood Cloud Centipede's strength. Otherwise, once the Demon Cloud Blood Crystal was used up, the Blood Cloud Centipede would be completely useless. South Horizon region's Baiming family, what kind of influence is that? Yiguchen wasn't too familiar with the influences of the South Horizon region. But, in the entire South Horizon region, the sects and families that he could name all had a strong background. After refining the Blood Cloud Centipede with his blood, Yiguchen also placed it into his origin ring. He hadn't reached the end of the path behind the blood-colored door. A venerable cave abode couldn't only have so many opportunities. Could it be that this venerable cave abode was left behind by an expert of the Baiming family? Yiguchen thought as he walked. Not long after, he once again encountered a barrier. This time, it wasn't a blood-colored door, but a light curtain. Yiguchen tried to break it with his physical strength, but he couldn't. Even with the addition of totem power, it was useless. Yiguchen also faintly sensed traces of soul fluctuations. It seems that if I want to break this light curtain, I'll have to cultivate to the divine soul realm. Yi Guqin wasn't too disappointed. The current harvest could already be considered extremely rich. Supreme-grade treasure medicines, enlightenment leaves, blood cloud centipede. Every one of them would attract the covetous eyes of many geniuses. After organizing his harvest, Yi Guqin also left the venerable cave abode. Chapter 235. After leaving the cave, Yi Guqin did not see Feng Manlu's figure. He must have left. He turned around and looked at the cave. The reincarnation sword lotus, formed by countless sword chi, covered the entire stone forest. Therefore, even if Yi Guqin left, he did not have to worry about outsiders entering the cave. I will come here to seek opportunities after I break through to the divine soul realm. The opportunities in the cave of a venerable in the heavenly palace are definitely not that simple. Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. Just by the appearance of the tree of enlightenment, Yi Guqin had reason to believe that there might be an ancient tree of enlightenment in the deepest part of the cave. Of course, this was the most ideal guess. If this was the case, even if there was only one ancient tree of enlightenment, it would be a priceless treasure. Yi Guqin slowly suppressed the burning passion in his heart. He was not someone who could not keep his cool. Little Yi, I smell a nice smell on you. The smell of precious medicine. The divine eagle flapped its wings and flew over, staring straight at Yi Guqin. Here you go. Yi Guqin was not stingy. He threw out a precious medicine. Ha, little Yi, I did not follow the wrong person. When I transform into a real golden-winged rock in the future, you can follow me and live a good life. The divine eagle opened its mouth and swallowed the precious medicine. It spat out multicolored light and suddenly became like an immortal. Yi Guqin laughed and shook his head. No matter how he looked at it, it did not look like a golden-winged rock. However, he would not expose it. He just took it as a way to relax. After that, Yi Guqin and the divine eagle sat on the blue sky eagle and flew toward the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was the holy land of the sword in the Saint Origin dynasty. It was also the place that many sword cultivators yearned for. Just the legends of the sword world in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest alone made people yearn for it. The current master of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Yan Chang'e, shocked the dynasty with his shocking sword technique that broke the heavenly mountain. The lightless sword king, Feng Manlu, was the youngest divine palace realm expert in the whole dynasty. Even though his cultivation level had dropped, he still comprehended the unity of man and sword. He swept through everyone in the elite gathering and shocked the world once again. There was also Yan Chang'e's daughter, Yan Wushuang, who was known to be unparalleled in the world with a sword in hand. She was also a sword fairy that many sword cultivators yearned for. In addition, Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, and the other inner court prodigies were all dazzling stars of the sword world. The various geniuses and their deeds made the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest incomparably sacred and transcendent in the eyes of all sword cultivators. He rode the green sky eagle for a few days. Yi Guqin was finally close to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. The swordsmanship-seeking mountain range was located in the southern region of the Saint Origin dynasty. It was a vast mountain range that spanned hundreds of thousands of miles. Unlike dangerous places like the Black Sky Mountain Range, the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range was surrounded by thin clouds and mist all year round. The environment was picturesque, with steep peaks and steep cliffs. The undulating mountain range was like a crouching azure dragon, full of spiritual energy. This was a cultivation holy land full of spiritual energy. Yi Guqin, who was sitting cross-legged on the green sky eagle, looked around. The mountain range was majestic, and there were many palaces, pavilions, squares, platforms, caves, and so on. They were like stars scattered in the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. This was the holy land of sword cultivators of the Saint Origin dynasty, where the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was located. As expected of the place where a big force is located. The spiritual energy between heaven and earth is several times denser than in other places. Yi Guqin couldn't help but sigh. This place is not bad, although it's a little worse than Lotus Village, the divine eagle said. Let's go down. Yiguchen lowered his head and saw a stone road in the mountains that extended to a mountain gate. It must be the entrance to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Yiguchen and the divine eagle landed, and the green sky eagle screeched and soared into the sky. As soon as Yiguchen reached the mountain gate, he saw a young disciple of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest standing in front of the mountain gate. He stepped forward and cupped his fists slightly. Well, stop talking. You're new, right? These days, many new disciples have come to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. The young man had obviously received too many people. At this moment, he looked impatient. No, Yiguchen didn't get angry. Instead, he said calmly, but he was interrupted by the young man again. I'm not interested in knowing who you are. These days, hundreds and thousands of outer disciples have come to report. Just follow me. The young man waved his hand. Obviously, he didn't know Yiguchen. After the elite meeting, Yiguchen's name spread throughout the Saint Origin dynasty. But not everyone knew what he looked like. Moreover, most of the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest had been cultivating in the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. Naturally, they didn't have time to watch the elite meeting. Although the young disciple's attitude was arrogant and impatient, Yiguchen didn't get angry. Yiguchen's state of mind had been calm for a long time. Unless his bottom line was crossed, he wouldn't get angry. Moreover, it was his first time in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. He didn't want to cause trouble. Yiguchen and the divine eagle followed the disciple into the mountain gate. The winding path led to a secluded place, and the surroundings were full of vegetation. Not long after, the sight in front of them suddenly opened up. It was a large square, paved with jade. On the square, there were different arenas. At this moment, there were many sword practitioners competing in the arenas. Excuse me, senior brother, this is? Yiguchen asked. Oh, these are the outer court disciples competing. In half a month, the ranking battle of the outer court disciples will be held. The top 10 disciples will have the opportunity to challenge the inner court disciples. If they win, they will have a meteoric rise. When mentioning the inner court disciples, the young man's eyes showed obvious respect and yearning. He looked at Yiguchen and warned, I warn you, other than the elders and deacons, you can't go against the senior brothers and senior sisters of the inner court. They are all true elites. The weakest one is at the half-step divine soul realm. I don't even see the fluctuation of genuine chi on your body. I'm afraid you are a servant disciple. Let me tell you, when you see the senior brothers of the inner court, you have to respectfully salute and learn to be humble. Do you understand? The young man's tone was very serious. Yiguchen couldn't help but laugh. Because the purple gold token of the fifth disciple of the inner court was in his origin ring. Just as Yiguchen was about to take out the token, a fight in one of the arenas attracted his attention. There were two women fighting in the arena. One of the women was dressed in a purple robe, which outlined her extremely graceful curves. Her face was charming. There was a beauty mark at the corner of her mouth. Not only did it not ruin her beauty, but it also made her charming temperament even more charming. At this moment, the woman's sword was extremely sharp. Her genuine chi surged as she reached the 9th cycle of chi refinement. She wasn't weak at all. But the one who attracted Yiguchen's attention was the other young woman. The young woman was clearly much younger than the purple-robed woman. She wore a green dress and was as elegant as a budding lotus flower. The young woman's face was white, her eyebrows were curved, her nose was high, and her lips were bright red. Her misty eyes seemed to be able to speak. They were clear and pure, revealing innocence. She was quite lovely. The reason Yiguchen was attracted to her was because her eyes were similar to Su Jianxu's. They were both pure and clear like a lake. But at this moment, the young woman was in danger under the purple-robed woman's sword. She was only at the 5th cycle of chi refinement at most, far from the purple-robed woman who was at the 9th cycle of chi refinement. Clang! The purple-clothed woman swung her sword to deflect the beautiful girl's sword, and the corners of her mouth faintly revealed a mocking smile. Chi la! The sword flashed and tore half of the young woman's dress, revealing her tender and white thighs. Then with another slash, the young woman's sleeves also turned into cotton, revealing her slender and fair arms. Junior Sister Mu, stop. Junior Sister Mu, admit that you're not as good as Senior Sister Qin. The disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest who were watching the battle couldn't bear to watch any longer and tried to persuade her. But the young woman didn't seem to hear them. She bit her lips and revealed a trace of determination in her eyes. Yi Guchen was slightly taken aback by the resolute look on his face. The young man beside Yi Guchen sighed and said, "Sigh, the purple-robed woman's name is Qin Lin, her. She's from the Qin family, a super family in Donglin Prefecture. Her current strength is enough to rank in the top 5 in the outer court. The green-robed woman's name is Mu Xingzu. I think she was originally a disciple of a big family, but it was destroyed by the Qin family." The Qin family? Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. Chapter 236. The Qin clan and Yi Guchen were mortal enemies. The 2 young kings of the Qin clan had died at his hands. The warlord of the Qin clan was still plowing the fields with the green bull in the Lotus village. The 2 young kings of the Qin clan are famous geniuses. I've never heard of Qin Lin, Yi Guchen said. It's normal that you don't know her. Qin Lin, joined the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest a long time ago. She didn't have her current cultivation at that time, but the 2 young kings were killed by Master Yi. I'm afraid she's the most talented person in the Qin clan now. The young man's face lit up when he mentioned Master Yi. His yearning for Master Yi was even greater than the respect he had for the inner yard disciples. Master Yi? Yi Guchen was confused. Since when did he have such a name? Oh, that's what the disciples of the Sword Sect call Yi Guchen. Isn't he the master of the sword? I heard that even though he lost his cultivation, he's a role model for us sword cultivators, the young man said respectfully. The divine condor looked at Yi Guchen and laughed. Yi Guchen's expression didn't change. He turned his gaze back to the arena. Rather than calling this a competition, it would be better to call it a humiliation and teasing. As Qin Lin's sword moved, Mu Xingzu's dress was torn in many places, revealing her fair skin. Mu Xingzu, is it that hard to admit defeat? You should know that you'll never be able to defeat me, let alone revive your shabby family. Qin Lin's charming face was full of mockery. Shut up. If it weren't for your Qin clan, my Mu clan wouldn't have been ruined. I, Mu Xingzu, will never admit defeat to you. The pretty girl named Mu Xingzhu had stubbornness and perseverance written all over her face. Oh, you're only in the 5th transformation chi refinement realm. How can you defeat me? Qin Lin was still full of mockery. So what? Aren't the 2 young kings of the Qin clan also known as geniuses? In the end, they were killed by Master Yi. Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect is my role model. Mu Xingzu gritted her teeth. Hearing this, Qin Lin's face, which was originally full of mockery, suddenly turned cold. Her eyes were filled with anger. Lowly girl, you're bringing up a sore spot. Looks like you're courting death. Qin Aoshi and the others were cousins and got along well with each other. At this moment, Mu Xingzhu's words were undoubtedly rubbing salt into her wound. Whoosh! Qin Lin held the sharp sword in her hand and shot through the air. She did not hold back and directly brushed past Mu Xingzhu's shoulder, leaving a wound there. Junior Sister Mu, quickly admit defeat. Many people around her advised. I, Mu Xingzu, will never admit defeat. Mu Xingzu gritted her teeth. You're the one who won't admit defeat. Don't blame me for not showing mercy. According to the rules of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, it doesn't matter if you're injured as long as you don't kill anyone. Qin Lin's eyes were filled with coldness. She swung her sword again, aiming it at Mu Xingzhu's chest. Although it was slightly away from the heart, it was obvious that she would be severely injured if she was stabbed. The surrounding disciples couldn't help but turn their heads. The cold sword was reflected in Mu Xingzhu's misty eyes. There was no fear in her heart, only unwillingness. She was unwilling to accept that she was so weak and powerless. She didn't even have the strength to fight back against her enemies. Sword Sect Yi, how can Xingzhu be like you? How can I get rid of all injustice with a single strike? Mu Xingzhu closed her eyes. Although she had never seen Yiguchen, the various rumors of the elite club made Mu Xingzhu yearn for Yiguchen. Clang! It was the sound of swords colliding. The pain of the sword piercing her body didn't come. Mu Xingzhu opened her eyes in confusion. A figure in a simple black robe stood in front of her. This scene caused the surrounding disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest to be stunned. Not only that, Qin Lin was also stunned. She didn't come back to her senses. You! What are you doing? Hurry up and apologize to senior sister Qin. The young man who received Yiguchen saw this and his head buzzed. He was also an outer court disciple. However, he was ranked at the bottom among the 5,000 outer court disciples. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been assigned the task of receiving newcomers. In his eyes, Qin Lin, who was ranked in the top 5 of the outer court, was an existence that he could only look up to. In the future, when Qin Lin entered the inner court, they would no longer be in the same world. In the face of such a person, the young man didn't dare to offend her. Therefore, when he saw Yiguchen blocking the sword, the young man shouted loudly. He didn't even think about how Yiguchen, who didn't have true energy, could block Qin Lin's sword. Are you alright? Yiguchen turned a deaf ear to the young man's scolding. He turned his face slightly and asked. Looking at Yiguchen's handsome side profile, Mu Xingzhu's little heart suddenly skipped a beat. She didn't know why this strange young man in front of her stood out to block the sword for her. Who are you? Are you an outer court disciple? On the opposite side, Qin Lin also reacted. She raised her eyebrows and scolded him. I'm new here. Miss, you hit me too hard just now. Yiguchen said indifferently. Since you're a newcomer, how dare you meddle in other people's business? I, Qin Lin, am ranked in the top 5 of the outer court. I'm your eldest senior sister. You'll be miserable in the outer court if you go against my will. Qin Lin, stared coldly and threatened. At the same time, she also sensed that Yiguchen didn't have any true energy on him. As for blocking the sword just now, Qin Lin, subconsciously thought that it was just a coincidence. Sorry, I'm not an outer court disciple. Yiguchen said. He had the purple gold token of the inner court, so he wasn't considered an outer court disciple. Oh, I see that you don't have any true energy on you. I'm afraid that you're a servant disciple. Since you know your lowly status, get out of my way. Qin Lin said impatiently as if she was driving a fly away. Thank you for your help, young master. You'd better get out of the way. It's not good to offend her for me. Mu Xingzhu looked grateful, but she still shook her head. With me here, she won't dare to do anything to you. Yiguchen said lightly. Although his voice wasn't loud, the people around him heard it. Whether it was the dozens of disciples who were watching the battle or the guide disciple, they were all stunned. Looking at the 5,000 outer court disciples, I'm afraid that not many people are qualified to say such words. Is this servant disciple trying to ascend to heaven? Some disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were stunned and then laughed. The clamor here also attracted the attention of some disciples who were watching the battle from the other arenas in the square. Many people walked toward Qin Lin's arena with the mentality of watching a show. However, as more and more people gathered, some of them looked at Yiguchen with doubts in their eyes. Why does he seem like? Some people hesitated and didn't dare to be sure. However, at this moment, a carefree young master in cyan landed on a white crane. This young master in cyan was none other than Chu Qingqi. Greetings, eldest senior brother. Greetings, senior brother Chu. As soon as Chu Qingqi came up, a large group of outer court disciples around the square cupped their fists. Obviously, inner court disciples were an extremely prominent status in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Chu Qingqi looked at the arena and saw Yi Guqin at a glance. His eyes immediately lit up. He walked directly to the arena. Qin Lin's face lit up when she saw Chu Qingqi walking over. She said, Lin greets senior brother Chu. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. I'll come and ask senior brother Chu for guidance after I drive this servant disciple away. Qin Lin thought that Chu Qingqi was walking to the arena to guide her in swordsmanship. Just as Qin Lin put on a smile and tried to make her smile more charming, Chu Qingqi ignored her. Chu Qingqi ignored Qin Lin and walked past her. This made the charming smile on Qin Lin's face freeze. Her face alternated between green and white, making her look rather comical. However, Chu Qingqi's next words made everyone, including Qin Lin, look astonished and shocked. Brother Yi, you're finally here after waiting for so long. As soon as Chu Qingqi said this, the noisy square instantly fell so silent that even a pin drop could be heard. Chapter 237. The air seemed to have frozen. Not only that, but everyone's faces froze as well. Their gazes were practically glued to Yi Guqin at the same time. The words that came out of Chu Qingqi's mouth caused their minds to go blank for a moment. Then, it was as if 10,000 thunderbolts were rumbling at the same time. He's the Sword Sect's Yi Guqin. An outer court disciple couldn't help but exclaim, unable to suppress the surging emotions in his heart. Following this exclamation, the originally frozen atmosphere seemed to have ignited gunpowder and exploded with a loud bang. The intense clamor was practically all discussing Yi Guqin. Among them, there were even some outer court female disciples who looked at Yi Guqin with eyes full of splendor. The story of Yi Guqin swinging his sword to kill a genius for a beauty had spread throughout the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. And these female disciples were also fascinated by Yi Guqin because of these stories. What? He's Sword Sect Yi. The young man who received Yi Guqin froze on the spot as if he was struck by lightning. His legs were trembling and he couldn't stand steadily. His face was pale and his breathing was rapid. He had the urge to strangle himself. The Sword Sect's Yi Guqin that he regarded as a role model was actually the youth in front of him who didn't have any true chi fluctuations. Not only that, but he also treated Yi Guqin with such an arrogant attitude. He even berated Yi Guqin and told him not to meddle in other people's business. Heavens! What have I done? How could I treat Sword Sect Yi like this? Will I be kicked out of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest? The young man's heart was beating violently. He was extremely nervous and regretful. He wanted nothing more than to slap himself. If Yi Guqin was really angry, he didn't need to do it himself. Naturally, someone would come to deal with this young man. But this young man was obviously overthinking. Yi Guqin wasn't so petty and wouldn't care about this. At this moment, on the arena, there were only two people whose hearts were fluctuating the most. Qin Liner and Mu Xingzu. But their states of mind were completely different. Qin Lin's face alternated between green and white. Clearly, Chu Qingqi's attitude made her feel rather awkward. However, Chu Qingqi's following words caused her mind to rumble, causing her to lose focus for a moment. Then, she glared at Yi Guqin with a cold look in her eyes. At the same time, Mu Xingzu, who was standing behind Yi Guqin, trembled violently. The young man in front of her who had saved her was actually the role model Yi Guqin that she had been looking forward to for so long. Mu Xingzu's eyes widened cutely. This change in status was too much of a shock for her. It was as if the God that they prayed to every day had appeared before them. Her heart was pounding like a little deer. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. She was excited, and curious. You are Yiguchen. Qin Lin-er's tone was extremely cold. Qin Lin-er. Yiguchen glanced at her. From their standpoint, the two of them already had an unresolvable enmity. Qin Lin-er, watch your attitude. Chu Qingqi frowned slightly. Qin Lin-er's face alternated between green and white. However, she was still unwilling and resentful. There was probably no one in the Qin family who didn't hate Yiguchen. She looked at Yiguchen. Her originally resentful expression suddenly dissipated and was replaced by a disdainful sneer. Sigh, Lin-er must have lost her mind. Why would she argue with a person who is about to die? Qin Lin shook her head, pretending to be relaxed, as if laughing at her own stupidity. As soon as these words came out, the noisy atmosphere in the surroundings instantly quieted down. Although these outer court disciples had heard of Yiguchen's many deeds, their blood was boiling. However, they had also heard that Yiguchen had been struck by the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion's Gu Xiaoyang's spirit star-devouring parasite. His true qi was sealed and he would eventually die. Right now, they really couldn't sense a trace of true qi on Yiguchen's body. So the news is true. Some disciples whispered to each other. There was a look of pity in their eyes. Brother Yi. You. Chu Qingqi seemed to be hesitant. Don't worry, it's fine. Yiguchen waved his hand. The spirit star-devouring parasite could only be considered a temporary problem for him. Ha, you're just deceiving yourself. Gu Xiaoyang is a true genius of the Nantian region. How can you deal with his methods? Even if you can survive, so what? Are you going to be a useless sword master without true qi? Qin Lin-er's tone was extremely vicious. She wanted to poke Yiguchen's sore spot. Qin Lin-er. Chu Qingqi's tone became heavier and his face was filled with displeasure. However, Qin Lin-er still gritted her teeth. Although Chu Qingqi was an inner court disciple, she also had a backer in the inner court, so she wasn't particularly afraid of Chu Qingqi. Look at Yiguchen, even if you join the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, you'll only be a servant disciple. What right do you have to be a hero in front of me? Hearing Qin Lin-er's words, the surrounding outer court disciples sighed. Although Qin Lin-er's words were vicious, what she said was indeed the truth. As the holy land of sword cultivators, the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest respected strength. No matter how famous you were before, if you didn't have the strength to match it, you would only be a topic of conversation and a joke over time. Take Yiguchen for example. If Gu Xiaoyang hadn't planted the spirit star-devouring parasite in him and kept him at his peak state, Qin Lin-er wouldn't dare to provoke him. Then, Qin Lin-er wouldn't even dare to fart, let alone speak as impudently as she did now. Everything was only because of strength. Qin Lin-er, you have to be careful with your words and actions. You can't bear the consequences of speaking rudely to an inner court violet gold token disciple. Chu Qingqi coldly snorted. As soon as his words came out, the entire square once again fell into a dead silence. Violet gold token. Doesn't that mean he's ranked in the top 10 of the inner court? Many of the surrounding disciples gasped. Qin Lin-er's face was filled with astonishment. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. What? An inner court violet gold token disciple? I don't believe it. Qin Lin-er cried out involuntarily. She didn't believe that Yiguchen, who had no genuine qi cultivation, could become an inner court disciple. In her eyes, Yiguchen couldn't even be an outer court disciple. He was only worthy of being a servant disciple. Qin Lin-er wasn't the only one who didn't believe it. Even the surrounding outer court disciples who were watching the show were dumbfounded. A violet gold token was too important in the inner court. It wasn't something that anyone could obtain. No one would believe that Yi Guchen was a violet gold token disciple when he had just entered the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. If Yi Guchen's cultivation wasn't damaged, it might be pardonable. However, he had no cultivation at all, which raised doubts. This is a token personally given by Master Feng Manlu. It's not up to you whether to believe it or not, Chu Qingqi said coldly. If Qin Lin didn't have some inner court disciples backing her up, Chu Qingqi wouldn't mind teaching her a lesson. Brother Chu, why waste your breath? Yi Guchen smiled faintly. From the beginning to the end, he had never taken Qin Lin seriously. Qin Lin wasn't qualified to be his opponent. At best, she was just a clown. When Yi Guchen first came to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, he didn't want to cause trouble. He only wanted to cultivate quietly and increase his strength. Yi Guchen, do you think you're better than others just because you have an inner court violet gold token? If you don't have the strength to match it, you'll just be a joke. In half a month, I'll participate in the outer court ranking battle and become the champion. Then, I'll challenge you in front of everyone and defeat you with my own hands. I, Qin Lin, want everyone to know that the so-called sword sect is just a good-for-nothing. Qin Lin raised her snow-white chin coldly and arrogantly. It seemed that in her eyes, Yi Guchen, who had no genuine qi cultivation, was a soft persimmon that anyone could bully. How noisy! Yi Guchen shook his head and sighed. He was annoyed by Qin Lin. She was like a fly that kept buzzing around him. Yi Guchen turned his head and suddenly looked at Mu Xingzu. Being stared at by Yi Guchen like this, Mu Xingzu's little heart beat even more violently. She slightly raised her eyelids with nervousness and anticipation. She timidly said, Senior Sword Sect Yi, why are you so reserved? Just call me Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. Mu Xingzu's pure and pretty eyes resembled Su Jianxu's. This made Yi Guchen naturally have a good impression of her. Senior. Brother Yi. Mu Xingzu's face was red as she stammered. What's your ranking among the 5,000 outer court disciples? Yi Guchen asked. Mu Xingzu is useless. I'm ranked 720th. Mu Xingzu tightly clenched her little hands as if she found it difficult to speak. Yi Guchen nodded slightly. With Mu Xingzu's current age and without any solid background and resources, she must have gone through a lot of hardships to reach her current cultivation. And her opponent, Qin Lin, surpassed Mu Xingzu in terms of age, background, and resources. In half a month, the outer court ranking battle will be held. Do you want to take first place? Yi Guchen casually asked. What? First place? Mu Xingzu was stunned at first, then her pretty eyes widened. She wasn't the only one. Chu Qingqi was also surprised. Everyone stared blankly at Yi Guchen. They didn't know what he meant. Follow me and cultivate. In half a month, I'll let you take first place in the outer court ranking battle. It'll save me the trouble of being noisy and annoying. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. His tone was indifferent and casual. It was as if he was talking about something that couldn't be more normal. However, these words were like a huge rock thrown into the water, setting off monstrous waves. Chapter 238. In half a month, Mu Xingzu, who was in the 5th refinement stage, defeated Qin Lin, who was in the 9th refinement stage. No one would believe it if they heard it. After all, there was a difference of 4 stages between them. Before this, Qin Lin, and Mu Xingzu had fought many times, but every time, Mu Xingzu was defeated by Qin Lin, with injuries all over her body. In the eyes of ordinary people, such a difference in strength could not be made up for in half a year, let alone half a month. At this moment, all the disciples in the square, including those who respected Yi Guchen, were full of doubts. Although they admired Yi Guchen, they did not like people who boasted. What's more, Yi Guchen was now a person who had no real qi cultivation. Qin Lin's face turned red when she heard this. She was so angry that she laughed and said, "Ha, Yi Guchen, have you lost your mind? This bitch can defeat me in the outer yard ranking battle after being under your control for half a month. Even in your dreams, it can't be this ridiculous." Not only did Qin Lin not believe it, but even Chu Qingqi was hesitant and said, "Brother Yi, this." Chu Qingqi wanted to say something but stopped. Because even if the elders in the inner yard were to teach Mu Xingzu, it would be impossible for them to help her defeat Qin Lin, who was in the 4th refinement stage, in half a month. Everyone's faces were full of doubts and disbelief. Qin Lin, was sneering as if she was waiting for Yi Guchen to make a fool of himself. Yi Guchen did not care about those doubtful looks. He was not only Yi Guchen, but also the sword demon, Duge Wubai, who had been in the Jianghu for 40 years. With the sword demon's experience, was he not qualified to teach Mu Xingzhu? To put it bluntly, Yi Guchen's current understanding of sword principle was no less than that of experts like Feng Manlu, if his strength and realm were not taken into consideration. He even surpassed him in some aspects. This was Yi Guchen's vision as the sword demon. Yi Guchen ignored everyone's attitude and turned to look at Mu Xingzhu. "Do you trust me?" It was a simple question without any unnecessary explanation. Yi Guchen had his hands behind his back, and his expression was as calm as an ancient well. Although he did not emit a trace of aura, in Mu Xingzhu's eyes, his figure was like an unyielding sword that shot into the sky, emitting a sharp edge. Mu Xingzhu's face turned red when she met Yi Guchen's dark eyes. She was a little nervous. However, she still bravely met Yi Guchen's gaze. Yi Guchen was Yi Gutz's words, Yi Gua, Yes Yi Guen, as always, Yi Guchen's, Xingzhu's was as before. She had long regarded Yi Guchen as her role model. How could she not agree? "Okay, since you trust me, I will fulfill my promise." Yi Guchen nodded with satisfaction. Qin Lin suddenly burst into laughter and said sarcastically, "Haha, Mu Xingzhu, you are really desperate. However, it's just right. One is a good-for-nothing girl who has been suppressed by me, and the other is a good-for-nothing sword master who has lost his true chi. They are a good match, haha." Qin Lin's laughter was very presumptuous with a hint of sarcasm. It was as if only such sarcasm and humiliation could ease the hatred in her heart. "Damn it, little Yi, how can you tolerate this? I can't stand this little girl anymore. Why don't you laugh to death if you keep laughing?" At this moment, the divine condor below the arena suddenly spoke angrily. As soon as it opened its mouth, the group of people was shocked. However, even so, they were not too surprised. After all, there were flying beasts that could speak. "You are just a stupid condor, a feathered beast. You don't need to talk." Qin Lin scolded. Alas! Yi Guchen put his hand to his forehead. Qin Lin could have provoked anyone, but she just had to provoke the divine condor. "What? You little girl, how dare you humiliate me?" The divine condor's eyes widened. In an instant, its demonic chi burst out and it rushed directly into the arena. It was a 4th-rank beast, comparable to an expert of the divine soul. Coupled with the flapping of its wings, it was extremely fast. The crowd did not even have time to react. As for Qin Lin, she did not have time to react. The divine condor flapped its wings and stretched out its claws. Rip! It tore the clothes on Qin Lin's shoulders. As the clothes flew, the bra underneath was exposed. "You are already so old, but you are wearing pink. What a slut." The divine condor laughed mischievously. Its tone was very vicious. If Yi Guchen had not warned it not to do anything in the sword sect forest, it would have killed Qin Lin. This claw would have killed Qin Lin. This. Qin Lin was dumbfounded. Her brain was buzzing, and she did not react for a moment. The next moment, she let out an extremely loud scream. She hurriedly took out a cloak from her vital ring and put it on. Qin Lin was so embarrassed that her face was about to bleed. She looked at the divine condor and held her anger, but she did not dare to say anything. Because the divine condor's claw had really made her feel like she was in a life-and-death crisis. If it were not for the fact that no one was allowed to die in the Sword Sect forest, she would have died. It is a fourth-rank beast. The Sword Sect is indeed worthy of being accompanied by such a powerful beast. Some of the outer yard disciples were also amazed. Although Yiguchen had lost all his genuine chi, the divine condor in the divine soul realm alone was enough to make a lot of people wary. At the same time, some people were secretly looking at Qin Lin, with ambiguous eyes. Qin Lin had always been very arrogant in the outer yard. She regarded herself as the eldest senior sister. They did not expect the color of her bra to be so slutty. Qin Lin seemed to have felt those obscure gazes. She was even more furious, but she could not vent her anger. She could only grit her teeth and stare at Yiguchen with hatred in her eyes as her face turned red. You only know how to rely on external objects. I want to see how you can let Mu Xingzu defeat me in the outer yard ranking battle in half a month, Qin Lin said angrily. I have my ways. Yiguchen's eyes were calm. Qin Lin looked at Yiguchen, and a dark light suddenly flashed in her eyes. She suddenly said, Yiguchen, since you are so confident, why don't we make a bet? If I lose to Mu Xingzu in the outer yard ranking battle, I am willing to be at your disposal and be your maid. Hearing Qin Lin's words, many disciples were surprised and at the same time, they were secretly excited. Qin Lin was the dream lover of many male disciples in the outer yard. If they could make Qin Lin a maid, how comfortable would that feel? However, if I defeat Mu Xingzu, I don't want much. I just want the violet gold token in your hand. As soon as Qin Lin finished speaking, the surroundings burst into an uproar. Only at this moment did they know what Qin Lin was planning. She actually wanted the violet gold token in Yiguchen's hand. Brother Yi, think carefully, Chu Qingqi reminded. Yiguchen's expression was still indifferent, a violet gold token in exchange for you. I'm not making a loss in this bet. You. Qin Lin was so angry that her blood surged, and she gritted her teeth tightly. She was a beauty after all. Her family background and cultivation were extraordinary, but she was actually looked down upon by Yiguchen. She was not worth a violet gold token. However, the truth was that the violet gold token was indeed the most valuable thing in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It was not only a symbol of status, but also a proof of obtaining abundant cultivation resources. Alright, if that's the case, then I'll add a type of heavenly thunder. How about it? Qin Lin's words were shocking. She suppressed her anger and spoke again. What? Many people were surprised. At this moment, Yiguchen could no longer remain calm. His gaze focused on Qin Lin as he frowned and said, You have the heavenly thunder? He did not think that Qin Lin had the ability to obtain such a miraculous item. My cousin, Qin Aoshi, once sensed another type of heavenly thunder with the ninth heaven profound thunder. Later, it was collected by Qin Baijian's uncle, but it was difficult to refine. Qin Aoshi's body was also unable to contain two types of heavenly thunder, so the heavenly thunder has always been in my Qin clan, waiting for a talented junior to refine it. Now, I, Qin Lin, am the most talented junior in the Qin clan. That ball of heavenly thunder naturally belongs to me, so I'm using it as a wager. Isn't that enough? Qin Lin had already put in a lot of effort. If Yiguchen still did not take the bait, there was nothing she could do. Yiguchen nodded his head and said, All right. Now that his Qi was sealed by the soul star devouring vermin, the only way to break it was to pass the third tribulation. The third tribulation also required the heavenly thunder. If Yiguchen passed the third tribulation, not only would he be able to break the seal on his Qi, but his strength would also skyrocket, and he would have a Qi of 10,000 feet. At that time, his talent and strength would shock the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the 7 major forces, and even the entire Saint Origin dynasty. Chapter 239. Alright, it's a deal. I don't think a sword master like you would go back on your word. Qin Lin's face lit up with joy. She was afraid that Yi Guqin would go back on his word, so she immediately agreed. There was a smug look in her eyes, and the corners of her mouth curled into a sneer as if victory was within her grasp. Because this was a bet that both parties were willing to make, Qin Lin could openly enjoy the status and resources of a violet gold token disciple after winning the bet. Brother Yi. Sigh. Chu Qingqi didn't know what to say. Although he had always been confident in Yi Guqin, he was not confident at this moment. It wasn't just Chu Qingqi. The surrounding outer court disciples who were watching the battle didn't think highly of Yi Guqin either. Not to mention his own strength, it wasn't that easy to teach someone. Senior Brother Yi, I'm sorry. Did Xingzhu cause you trouble? Mu Xingzhu said guiltily when she saw the gazes of the people around her. It's fine. It's fine as long as you win. Yi Guqin was very calm. Looking at the young man's calm and confident appearance, Mu Xingzhu clenched her fists tightly and secretly swore that no matter what, she couldn't lose even if she had to hold on until the last moment. The more confident you are now, the more miserable you will be in half a month. Qin Lin glanced at Yi Guqin and Mu Xingzhu with a sneer, then turned and left. Brother Yi, you just arrived at the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, and it seems that you've caused quite a bit of trouble, Chu Qingqi said with a wry smile. What trouble? Her. Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. He didn't treat Qin Lin as an opponent because she wasn't qualified. It's fine if it's just Qin Lin but she has connections with many disciples in the inner court, including some of the top geniuses. Chu Qingqi shook his head. She has that kind of connection, Yi Guqin said casually. He didn't care too much. Looking at Yi Guqin's calm and casual attitude, Chu Qingqi said with a wry smile, it's fine if she's an inner court disciple with a low ranking, but Qin Lin has Wang Xiaotian, the third in the inner court. Wang Xiaotian? Yi Guqin was confused. He had just arrived at the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest and did not know much about the geniuses of the inner courtyard. Wang Xiaotian is at the 6th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. Not only has he mastered many spirit-grade sword arts, he has also cultivated the Sword Sect's Tower Forest's King-grade sword art, the Wind and Cloud sword art. His strength is not to be underestimated, Chu Qingqi said in a serious tone. The 6 transformations of the Divine Soul is indeed not bad. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. But that was all. Chu Qingqi tactfully changed the topic when she saw Yi Guqin's stubborn expression. Brother Yi, it's your first time here. I'll take you to the inner yard and tell you about many things while I'm at it, Chu Qingqi said. Yi Guqin nodded, then turned to look at Mu Xingzhu and said, you should come over too. When Mu Xingzhu heard this, she was pleasantly surprised. The inner yard was a forbidden area for outer yard disciples. Only inner yard disciples could enter it. After that, Chu Qingqi led Yi Guqin, Mu Xingzhu, and the Divine Eagle into the inner yard. As for the many disciples in the square, they were all excitedly talking about what had happened. It was conceivable that in a few days, the gambling battle between Qin Lin and Yi Guqin would spread throughout the outer yard, and even the inner yard would get the news. Half a month. Can the Sword Sect really train Mu Xingzhu well and let her defeat Qin Lin? I don't think so. Being powerful and teaching others are two completely different things. Yes, I'm afraid senior sister Qin will win. When that time comes, Yi Guqin won't even be able to keep his status as an inner yard disciple. Alas, if Sword Sect Yi hadn't lost his cultivation, Qin Lin wouldn't have the room to be arrogant. The outer yard disciples fell into a discussion. At this moment, Yi Guqin followed Chu Qingqi into the inner yard. In the entire swordsmanship-seeking mountain range, the outer yard occupied 60% of the land, and the inner yard only 40%. However, these 40% were the essence of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. After passing through the formation set up at the gate of the inner yard, Yiguchen also entered the inner yard. The inner yard was located in the depths of the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. Compared to the outer yard, the inner yard was more spiritual. The mountains and rivers were beautiful, like a paradise on earth. There were many towering peaks and pavilions among them, which was pleasing to the eye. Brother Yi, since you've become an inner yard disciple, it's necessary to tell you some basic things. Our inner yard disciples are limited to 100 people all year round. If there's an elite from the outer yard, he can defeat the inner yard disciples and replace them. In addition, there's also the inner yard ranking battle. It's a ranking among the 100 disciples. Brother Yi, you should know the function of the token. The higher the ranking, the more cultivation resources you'll get. Chu Qingqi glanced at Yiguchen worriedly. Yiguchen, who had lost his genuine qi, occupied the purple gold token. In the eyes of the inner yard disciples, he was a delicious piece of meat. It was conceivable that when the inner yard ranking battle began, many people would challenge Yiguchen to snatch this piece of meat. Of course, Yiguchen himself knew that this was a test from Wind's sweeping tower for him. If he couldn't even keep the purple gold token, he would be ashamed of the sword sect. As for the resources, residence, and so on, I'll take you there later. Now, I'll take you to the 3 places of opportunity. Chu Qingqi smiled mysteriously and said. The 3 places of opportunity. Yiguchen was curious. The reason why the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest is called the Holy Land of Sword Cultivators is naturally unique, Chu Qingqi said. Then, Chu Qingqi led Yiguchen and the others to a place in a wide valley. Yiguchen looked around. In the valley, there were countless long swords stuck into the ground. The sword light was piercingly cold and glittering, and there was no end in sight. This scene caused Yiguchen's heart to faintly tremble. Mu Xingzu also opened her mouth wide. It was the first time she had seen such a strange scene. Chu Qingqi seemed to be used to it and said, the reason why the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest is called this is because of 2 places of opportunity. The first is the Forest of 10,000 Swords. The Forest of 10,000 Swords contains the swords of the sect masters, elders, and disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. They have been passed down from generation to generation. In addition, there are famous swords collected from various places. There are more than 10,000 swords in total, forming this dense forest. Almost all of the swords are spiritual weapons, and there are also many spiritual inscription weapons. In the deepest part, there are even spiritual inscription weapons left behind by the sect masters. They are extremely powerful. Every new disciple who enters the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest has a chance to enter the Forest of 10,000 Swords to choose a sword. It seems to be in 3 days. Brother Yi, didn't one of your swords break in battle? You can choose another one, Chu Qingqi said. Yiguchen nodded. This Forest of 10,000 Swords really interested him. However, Yiguchen thought about it and said, the Forest of 10,000 Swords is full of sword qi. It's probably difficult to get a sword. Indeed, the owner of a famous sword depends on opportunity. The deeper one's understanding of swords, the deeper one can go and even resonate with the sword will. Chu Qingqi said. Sword will resonate? Yiguchen was puzzled. It can cause a stir in the Forest of 10,000 Swords. When Yan Wushuang entered the Forest of 10,000 Swords to choose a sword, she caused 5,000 swords to hum in unison and shook half of the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. That scene was really unforgettable. Chu Qingqi recalled and was still amazed. That's interesting. Yiguchen smiled faintly. He was very curious. If he entered, how many swords would resonate with him? Ha, Brother Yi, don't be anxious. The sword selection day is in 3 days. The new disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest will gather together and enter the Forest of 10,000 Swords to choose a sword. At that time, you will have a choice. Chu Qingqi shook his head and smiled. Then, Chu Qingqi led Yi Guqin and the others to the second place of opportunity. Chapter 240. The second place of opportunity in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was located on another steep mountain. Before they arrived, Yi Guqin saw a towering stone pagoda standing on the mountain peak in the distance. Although the stone pagoda was not particularly tall, it gave off an ancient and majestic feeling. Vaguely, there seemed to be the sound of swords ringing out from within the stone pagoda. Brother Yi, that's the second place of opportunity, the Sword Sect Pagoda, Chu Qingqi said with a smile. Sword Sect Pagoda, Forest of Myriad Swords. When the two places of opportunity were put together, it was the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It is indeed mysterious. Yi Guqin nodded slightly. When he saw the Sword Sect Pagoda, even Yi Guqin felt a surge in his heart. He seemed to be unable to control his sword intent and faintly emitted it. Chu Qingqi led Yi Guqin and the others to the Sword Sect Pagoda and explained, the Sword Sect Pagoda has existed in the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range since ancient times. I don't know who built it, but the seniors of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest built the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest with this pagoda as the center after discovering it. Lord Feng Manlu is in seclusion on the 8th floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda all year round. It is usually closed and only opens once a month. Only inner court disciples are qualified to enter the Sword Sect Pagoda. There are 9 floors in the Sword Sect Pagoda. No one has entered the 9th floor until now. Only the sect master, Lord Feng, and the first elder have entered the 8th floor. The elders have entered the 7th floor, and only the top 10 geniuses of the inner court have entered the 6th floor. Is it that difficult? Yi Guqin asked. There is a special sword pressure in the Sword Sect Pagoda. At the same time, the test on each floor is different, which is why it is so challenging. Chu Qingqi smiled and continued. However, there are also benefits in the Sword Sect Pagoda. The world's spirit qi in the pagoda is extremely abundant. The first floor is equivalent to twice as much as the outside world, the second floor is twice as much, and so on. It can be said to be a treasured place for cultivation. Then when the Sword Sect Pagoda opens, won't I be able to challenge it directly? Yi Guqin asked. This, even if it's the first level of the Sword Sect Pagoda, one would need at least a half-step divine soul realm cultivation to be able to withstand that pressure. Of course, if Brother Yi has other methods, then perhaps it might be possible, said Chu Qingqi. Yi Guqin nodded. It seemed that the Sword Sect Pagoda was indeed very interesting. Perhaps Chu Qingqi didn't know, but Yi Guqin did. On the 8th level of the Sword Sect Pagoda, there was an incomplete ultimate technique of the Sword Sect, the Reincarnation Sword Lotus. As for the 9th floor, Feng Manlu guessed that there was a complete version of the Reincarnation Sword Lotus. Yi Guqin could be said to be determined to obtain this ultimate sword technique within the Sword Sect Pagoda. Only by obtaining even more of the Sword Sect's ultimate techniques would Yi Guqin have the confidence to compete for the inheritance of the 9 generations of the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect Pagoda has already been opened this month, so if Brother Yi wants to challenge the pagoda, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until next month, said Chu Qingqi. Yi Guqin nodded. He had no regrets as there would be plenty of opportunities in the future. After the Sword Sect Pagoda, Chu Qingqi once again brought Yi Guqin to the third land of opportunity. Compared to the shock of the first forest of 10,000 swords, the second Sword Sect Pagoda was majestic. This third land of opportunity was very simple and unadorned. The location was next to a cliff. However, before they arrived at the location, Yi Guqin felt an extremely mysterious sword concept. This feeling is... Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows and asked in surprise. Brother Yi is indeed worthy of being called the Sword Sect Master. You're indeed sharp. Follow me. Chu Qingqi smiled mysteriously. Not long after, they arrived at a cliff. On the opposite side of the cliff was a towering cliff. The cliff reached the sky like a stone wall. There was only a sword mark left on the cliff. At first glance, the sword mark looked ordinary and ordinary. However, after Yiguchin stared at it for a while, a look of horror appeared in his eyes. Although this sword mark looks ordinary, I'm afraid it has already reached the supreme realm of returning to simplicity. Yiguchin's eyes were filled with amazement. Up until now, he could be considered to have experienced many things, and it was not as if he had never seen a sword expert before. However, this was the first time he had seen a sword mark that carried the meaning of returning to simplicity. The entire area around the cliff was shrouded in a mysterious and profound concept. And the source of this concept was the seemingly ordinary sword mark on the precipice. This land of opportunity is called the One Sword Cliff. I don't know who left this sword mark, but the sword concept that spread out is something that even time cannot wear away. Under the shroud of this sword concept, one's understanding of swordsmanship will be greatly helpful. However, because this sword concept is too mysterious, most of the disciples in the inner yard find it difficult to understand and adapt to it. Therefore, there are few people here. Chu Qingqi sighed slightly when he spoke of this. There were only a few people who could use such a mysterious sword concept to comprehend it. It was as if there was a mountain of treasure in front of them, but they could not obtain it. It was a pity. This sword mark. Yiguchin frowned. For some reason, he felt that this sword mark was vaguely familiar, as if he had experienced it somewhere before. This sense of familiarity made Yiguchin unable to make heads or tails of it for a while. Brother Yi, there is no way to investigate the origin of this sword mark, but the only thing that is certain is that there is no place for other sword marks on this cliff besides this one, Chu Qingqi said. Oh, what do you mean? Yiguchin was curious. The reason why One Sword Cliff has this name is because only this sword can exist. Even people like Sect Master Yen and Lord Feng are unable to leave their own sword mark on the cliff, Chu Qingqi explained. It's actually so mysterious. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. He was a sword maniac and was most interested in this kind of thing. That's right. There are countless genius sword cultivators in the Sword Sect's Tower Forest who want to leave their own sword mark on One Sword Cliff, but none of them succeed. This is because this sword mark is too ancient and mysterious. Its realm is so profound that other sword chi cannot leave a mark around it at all. Chu Qingqi's tone was filled with admiration as he spoke. It was hard to imagine just how powerful the peerless sword cultivator who left behind this sword mark on One Sword Cliff was. Even peerless sword kings like Yen Chang'e and Feng Manlu would have to concede defeat. Alright, if Brother Yi is free in the future, you can come and study One Sword Cliff at any time. In any case, no one usually comes here. In addition, the Sword Sect's Tower Forest also has the Sword Technique Pavilion, Skills Method Hall, Pill Hall and other places. They are all very easy to find. Brother Yi, let's go to your residence now. Chu Qingqi smiled faintly. Thank you, Brother Chu. Yiguchin cupped his hands together. By the way, there is one thing that I need to remind Brother Yi. It may be related to your safety. Chu Qingqi frowned slightly and said hesitantly. What is it? Yiguchin's eyes flashed when he saw Chu Qingqi's serious appearance. Chapter 241. There are currently 3 people in charge of the Sword Sect Tower Forest. Sect Master Yen Chang'e, Lord Feng Manlu and the First Elder. Sect Master Yen travels outside all year round and rarely returns to the sect. Lord Feng has always been in closed-door training in the Sword Sect Tower, so the First Elder is in charge of everything in the Sword Sect Tower Forest. But I've vaguely heard from the inner courtyard disciples under the First Elder that the First Elder seems to have some objections to Lord Feng letting you monopolize the venerable cave dwelling, Chu Qingqi said worriedly. The First Elder doesn't want me to monopolize the venerable cave dwelling? Yiguchin pointed out. Brother Yi, you also know how important a venerable cave dwelling is to a force. The first elder is dissatisfied with Lord Feng giving the venerable cave dwelling to you alone, Chu Qingqi said. With Senior Feng around, the first elder shouldn't dare to act rashly on the surface. Yi Guqin scrunched his brows in a frown. The first elder's strength is about the same as Xian Tai's, and he's half a step into the divine dwelling stage. There are many disciples in the inner courtyard, including the second-ranked disciple Bai Zichen, who was personally brought up by the first elder. Chu Qingqi smiled bitterly. The second-ranked disciple of the inner courtyard? Yi Guqin raised his eyelids slightly. This was already a very high-ranking disciple, second only to Yan Wushuang. You mean Bai Zichen will make trouble for me? Yi Guqin asked. I'm not sure. Bai Zichen is also in closed-door training all year round, but his cultivation is stronger than Wang Xiaotian's. I'm afraid he has reached the seventh transformation of the divine spirit, Chu Qingqi said in a serious tone. Yi Guqin secretly nodded. The inner courtyard of the Sword Sect Tower Forest was indeed a place where experts and elites gathered. I'll deal with whatever comes my way, Yi Guqin said casually. Not to mention how powerful he would be after passing the tribulation after obtaining the strange thunderbolt. He now had the divine condor and other class 4 demonic beasts, as well as the blood cloud centipede he found in the venerable cave dwelling. If someone wanted to attack Yi Guqin wouldn't mind teaching them a bloody lesson. Sigh, Brother Yi is really optimistic. Chu Qingqi didn't know what to say. By the way, Brother Chu, I have something to ask. When will the sect send people to the land of 5 elements to fight against the Berserker tribe? Yi Guqin thought for a moment and asked. He hadn't forgotten the most important matter, and had always kept the matter of finding the saintly medicine in his heart. Moreover, if he wanted to nurture the 5-colored golden core in his body, he would need to go to the 5 elemental land. Brother Yi, there's no need to rush. In a few months, you'll have to go even if you don't want to, Chu Qingqi said with a smile. Why? Yi Guqin asked. It'll be the autumn harvest in a few months. The barbarian tribe in the land of 5 elements will launch a large-scale invasion at this time every year. With the strength of the Great Desolation Mansion, how can we possibly defend against them? When the time comes, the 7 great forces will send people to guard the land of 5 elements and fight against the barbarian tribe, Chu Qingqi explained. Yi Guqin nodded to himself. He had a year to find the saintly medicine, so waiting for 2 or 3 months was not too much. Most importantly, he hadn't gone through the tribulation and his strength hadn't increased. Even if he went to the land of 5 elements, it would be futile. It seems that I have to seize the time to improve my strength. I must get the heavenly thunder, Yi Guqin thought to himself. Later, Chu Qingqi led Yi Guqin and the others to the residence of the inner yard disciples. There were many mountains in the inner yard. Every inner yard disciple could occupy a mountain by himself. The higher the ranking of the disciples, the higher the mountain they occupied, and the richer the spirit qi there. Do you see that mountain peak? Chu Qingqi pointed. Yi Guqin looked into the distance and saw a mountain peak among the towering peaks. It was like a moon surrounded by stars, with a kind of aloof charm. That's the residence of the number 1 disciple of the inner yard, senior sister Yan Wushuang, Chu Qingqi said with a hint of admiration when he mentioned Yan Wushuang. As the daughter of sect master Yan Changge, Yan Wushuang's talent in sword Dao was quite amazing. Back in the Myriad Swords Forest, she had resonated with 5,000 long swords and shook half of the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. Chu Qingqi was also there that day, which was why he could not forget that scene for a long time. Looking at Chu Qingqi's attitude, Yi Guqin became more and more curious about Yan Wushuang, whom he had never met. Brother Ye's residence is over there. Chu Qingqi led Yi Guqin and the others to a mountain peak slowly. This mountain peak was quite tall, and the spirit qi in the surroundings was as dense as fog, pervading the surroundings. At the top of the mountain in front, a pavilion and courtyard could be vaguely seen, surrounded by tall bamboo. It was indeed a good place to cultivate. However, Just as Yiguchen and the others approached the courtyard, they saw a figure standing quietly in front of a bamboo forest. Yiguchen frowned slightly. The figure was a young man in a golden robe, about 20 years old. A golden jade hung from his waist, and his hands were behind his back. His face was as sharp as a knife, with an unconcealable fierce aura. "May I ask who this brother is?" Yiguchen stared at the golden-robed young man. Although he could not detect his specific cultivation, it was obvious that he was a divine soul expert, and not a first transformation divine soul expert like Xianing. "You are Yiguchen of the Sword Sect?" The golden-robed young man slowly turned around and looked at Yiguchen. Yiguchen frowned. The golden-robed young man directly ignored his question. "He is Li Lingxiao, ranked 5th in the inner courtyard." "No, he is ranked 6th now. He used to live here," Chu Qingqi said in a low voice. Yiguchen suddenly understood. No wonder this young man had an inexplicable hostility towards him. It turned out that he had taken his place. When he thought of this, Yiguchen also felt that it was a little troublesome. "Brother Chu, is there no other residence?" Yiguchen was not picky about where to live. "Are you giving me charity?" However, before Chu Qingqi could speak, the eyes of the golden-robed young man named Li Lingxiao suddenly emitted a cold light, and a vigorous soul fluctuation surged out. The surrounding bamboo forest rustled, shaking off countless bamboo leaves. Yiguchen was forced to take a step back. He frowned, but did not lose his composure. "Oh." Li Lingxiao's expression became a little more serious. "Brother Yi, the residence corresponding to the ranking is fixed. Since you are here, senior brother Li will naturally have to move," Chu Qingqi said. Yiguchen nodded slightly. It seemed that there was no other way. "Yiguchen, I have to say that you are indeed a genius with dual sword intents. Unfortunately, your cultivation has been crippled, and now you have no cultivation." Li Lingxiao looked directly at Yiguchen with deep eyes. "You don't have to worry about that," Yiguchen said flatly. "Although I don't know why Lord Feng Manlu gave the 5th token to you, it won't be long before the inner courtyard ranking battle begins." "I will take back what I deserve," Li Lingxiao said coldly. He did not say anything else and directly left. Chu Qingqi sighed slightly as he watched Li Lingxiao's departing figure. Wang Xiaotian behind Qin Liner, Bai Zichen under the Great Elder, and Li Lingxiao. "It seems that I have made a lot of enemies in just one day in the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest." Yiguchen shook his head and laughed. He did not know what to feel. "Brother Yi, you, take care." Chu Qingqi could only say so. Chapter 242. Yiguchen decided to stay at the top of the mountain after he had decided on his residence. Chu Qingqi went to collect the cultivation resources on Yiguchen's behalf. Yiguchen, the divine condor, and Mu Xingzu entered the courtyard. There were artificial mountains, tall bamboos, and a mirror-like lake. This was indeed an immortal residence. No wonder those aristocratic family disciples want to join the 7 great factions no matter what. Yiguchen couldn't help but click his tongue. Yiguchen even sensed the faint fluctuations of an array formation under the courtyard. Along with the circulation of the formation, the surrounding spiritual energy, which was already relatively dense, gathered in this residence. "Hee, it's not bad to live here." The divine condor flapped its wings in satisfaction. Mu Xingzu was at a loss. She bit her lip and said, "Thank you for bringing me to the inner courtyard, senior brother Yi. I'll take my leave now." Mu Xingzu was about to leave. As an outer courtyard disciple, she didn't have the right to stay in the inner courtyard. "Wait, you can live with me." Yiguchen waved his hand. Mu Xingzu stopped in her tracks. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. She turned around timidly. Her fair face was already flushed red, making her look rather shy and cute. Yiguchen was slightly taken aback. It was obvious that Mu Xingzhu had misunderstood. You misunderstood. I just want you to live in this residence. The spirit chi here is rich, so it's convenient for cultivation. I can also find time to guide you, Yi Guchen explained. At this moment, Mu Xingzhu finally came to her senses, and her face instantly turned bright red. Clearly, her understanding was a bit off. However, the more Mu Xingzhu revealed such a pure personality, the more Yi Guchen admired her. Perhaps this was, love me, love my dog. Yi Guchen's gaze was complicated. He thought of Su Jianshi again. I have to undo the seal on my sea of energy as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if I go to the land of the 5 elements, I won't be able to do anything. Yi Guchen felt a sense of urgency. Senior brother Yi, when will you teach Xingzhu the sword technique? Mu Xingzhu changed the topic in order to ease the awkwardness. 3 days later, after Wang Jianlin finishes choosing his sword, you can officially start cultivating, Yi Guchen said. Mu Xingzhu nodded obediently. After that, she also stayed in a cultivation room next to Yi Guchen's residence. Outer courtyard disciples were not allowed to stay in the inner courtyard. However, as a disciple with a purple token, Yi still had the right to stay. Not long after, Chu Qingqi arrived and handed a origin ring to Yi Guchen. Brother Yi, this is a month's worth of cultivation resources for a disciple with a purple token. Remember to go to Wang Jianlin to choose his sword in 3 days. At that time, all the new disciples will participate. There will also be inner courtyard disciples watching the ceremony. There will even be elders going to accept disciples. Chu Qingqi left after he finished speaking. Accept disciples? Yi Guchen was not interested. Perhaps other disciples valued having a master, but Yi Guchen did not need to acknowledge anyone as his master. He was the clearest about his path of the sword. When he first entered the blood listening tower, the broken sword elder wanted to accept him as a disciple, but Yi Guchen did not agree. Yi Guchen temporarily put aside his thoughts and looked through the origin ring. After looking through it, Yi Guchen could not help but marvel at the generosity of the major forces. 50 spirit gathering pills. It was very helpful for cultivating true qi and advancing cultivation. 50 spirit pills. It was very important for nurturing soul power. Yi Guchen sighed. Back when he was in the cave abode of the divine soul expert in the Tianhuang Plains, he found a gourd of spirit pills. There were only 20 to 30 pills. The sword sect pagoda forest gave out 50 pills at once. Not only that, but there were also 50 blazing flame pills. It was very helpful for tempering the body. There are also crystal jades. There are a total of 30,000 pieces. Yi Guchen was speechless. In the beginning, he had to run around to gather 5,000 crystal jades in the Sky River province. However, in the inner courtyard, he received 30,000 crystal jades every month. This is a secret technique. Yi Guchen was not too surprised when he heard that there were elixirs and crystal jades. However, this secret technique really surprised Yi Guchen. He reckoned that only the disciples with the purple gold token would be able to obtain this secret technique. For a major force like the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the secret technique that they gave to their elite disciples was definitely not ordinary. After a round of investigation, Yi Guchen took a deep breath. There was a hint of joy in his eyes. This secret technique was called the Soul Tempering Secret Technique. As the name suggested, it was a secret technique that specialized in tempering soul power. Currently, Yi Guchen only had 2 secret techniques. They were the soul-devouring secret technique and the soul-burning secret technique. The soul-burning secret technique focused on the explosion of soul power. It was very harmful to the soul. Although he had the help of the spirit pill, the effect was not as good as the soul-tempering secret technique. If I consume the spirit pill every day and use the soul-tempering secret technique, I will be able to enter the divine soul realm easily once my chi si is unsealed. Yi Guchen was confident. After this, Yi Guchen entered into cultivation. Mu Xingzu was in another cultivation room. The divine eagle was running around the mountain. Although Yi Guqin could not use his true qi, he could still cultivate his soul power. After consuming the spirit pill, Yi Guqin began to cultivate the soul tempering secret technique. He used the secret technique to temper his soul power. When his soul power was extremely condensed and gathered together, it could form the sea of consciousness. Qi refining realm, cultivate the sea of consciousness. Divine soul realm, cultivate the sea of consciousness. As long as he cultivated the sea of consciousness, it meant that Yi Guqin had entered the divine soul realm. A spirit pill could allow Yi Guqin to cultivate for a day. Just like this, 3 days passed in a flash. Yi Guqin opened his eyes. He felt that his mind was much clearer and his 5 senses were much sharper. This was an illusion. It was not that Yi Guqin's 5 senses had become sharper. Instead, it was because his soul power had become much denser. Naturally, his perception had become much stronger. If I cultivate like this, breaking through to the divine soul realm is just around the corner. If I unseal my qi si together, I will be able to cultivate the next tribulation of the 9 tribulations Heart Sutra. Yi Guqin thought about the direction of his future cultivation. He walked out of his room and found that Mu Xingzu was already standing respectfully outside the door. Senior brother Yi, today is the day we go to the forest of 10,000 swords to choose a sword. Mu Xingzu revealed a smile. In fact, she was happy because she was finally going to practice swords with Yi Guqin. Yes, let's go. Yi Guqin nodded his head slightly. The divine eagle had gone somewhere to play, and Yi Guqin did not bring it along. At this moment, a large group of people had gathered outside the valley where the forest of 10,000 swords was located. At a glance, there were heads everywhere. The elite gathering had just ended, and all the new disciples had gathered outside the forest of 10,000 swords. They'd heard of the fortuitous encounters in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, and their faces carried traces of excitement at this moment. After all, if they could choose a good sword, it would be of great help to their strength. Other than the new disciples, there were also many old disciples who were paying attention. Not only that, but there were also some elders who appeared outside the valley, waiting for the sword selection to begin. This was because every person who entered the forest of 10,000 swords would resonate with the swords here. The deeper one's understanding of swords, the more swords they would resonate with. I wonder if there will be a disciple who can resonate with thousands of swords during the sword selection today. A green-robed elder said with anticipation. He was none other than Elder Qing He, who had appeared at the elite gathering. I don't know about the others, but there is one person who can definitely do it, a gray-robed elder beside Elder Qing He said with a smile. Oh, is Elder Gu Tua talking about that sword sect master? Elder Qing He said. That Yi Guqin has no true qi, and his cultivation has been crippled. What can he do? I'm talking about him. The gray-robed elder named Gu Tua pointed with his finger. He pointed at a lonely figure among the new disciples. He was dressed in black, and his left eye was covered by a black eye patch. He did not fit in with the lively atmosphere around him. It was elemental annihilation. Chapter 243. The black-clothed Yuan Mia stood among the new disciples, having a powerful aura like a crane standing among a flock of chickens. The surrounding disciples looked at Yuan Mia and whispered. Yuan Mia is really strong. He was an inner court disciple the moment he entered the Sword Sect Forest. Although he's only ranked 90th, it won't be long before he enters the top 50. Have you forgotten about Yi Jianzong? He's the inner court's 5th-ranked disciple. Yi Jianzong probably won't be able to keep his position. After all, he's lost his cultivation. I wonder if he'll come today. The record of the Myriad Swords Forest was set by Senior Sister Yen, right? 5,000 swords rang in unison. I wonder if Yuan Mia can break the record. What a pity. If Yi Jianzong's cultivation wasn't crippled, he might have a chance to break the record. After all, he's a peerless genius with dual sword intent. Many new disciples were discussing. Not only that, but even the older disciples were also curious. Would there be another shocking scene like Yan Wushuang's today? Among the senior disciples who were watching the battle, there was a purple-clothed figure. She was Qin Lin, and her face was seductive. There were several young men standing beside her. All of them had dignified appearances, and the bronze token hanging on their waists revealed their identity as inner court disciples. Although they were only ranked below 50, their status was definitely not something that the outer court disciples could compare to. Senior brothers, is senior brother Wang Xiaotian not here? Qin Lin, asked. Senior brother Wang doesn't have the time to join in the fun. An inner court disciple shook his head and laughed. That's a pity. He won't be able to see Yi Guqin's embarrassing appearance. Qin Lin, smiled lazily. His smile caused the souls of the nearby inner court disciples to leave their bodies. It had to be said that Qin Lin's figure and appearance could be considered as a charming beauty. Although Yi Jianzong is admirable, he's already a cripple. How can he fight against you, junior sister Qin? An inner court disciple flattered with a fiery gaze. Thank you senior brothers for your auspicious words. I'd like to see how Yi Guqin will embarrass himself in the myriad swords forest. Qin Lin, sneered in disdain. I'm afraid that sword Sekyi wouldn't dare to come. An inner court disciple beside him laughed. Qin Lin, and the others didn't try to hide their voices at all. Almost everyone around them heard them. Seeing them slander Yi Guqin, many of the disciples who idolized Yi Guqin felt somewhat displeased. However, they were powerless to refute. After all, it was a fact that Yi Guqin had been crippled. Alright, all the new disciples, as one of the 7 great powers, my sword sect's tower forest naturally has its own resources and resources. This 10,000 sword forest is a place of fortune that I'm giving to all of you for free. Among the swords, even the weakest is an upper-grade spiritual weapon. There are also quite a number of spiritual inscriptions divine weapons. If any of you are capable, you can even enter the depths of the forest of 1,000 swords and obtain the legacy of the mystical inscriptions divine weapons left behind by the previous sect masters. In addition, the 10,000 sword forest is filled with sword chi. Only those who have a deeper understanding of the sword will be able to resonate with it. The best among them will have the opportunity to be accepted as a disciple by the elders of the inner court. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You must seize it well. Elder Qing He took a step forward and said in a clear voice. Hearing Elder Qing He's words, many of the new disciples were even more excited. All of them rubbed their palms together, eager to perform well. Alright, you will enter one by one in order. Elder Qing He waved his hand and said. On the other side, Chu Qingqi, who was among the inner court disciples, looked around and couldn't help but mutter to himself, Brother Yi isn't here yet? The sword selection in the 10,000 sword forest had officially begun. The new disciples were all excited, but at the same time, they were a little nervous. As for the older disciples who had experienced this before, they watched with interest as if waiting for them to embarrass themselves. The first new disciple stepped forward and entered the 10,000 sword forest. His cultivation was also at the 6th cycle of chi refinement, which was considered quite good. However, as soon as he stepped into the 10,000 sword forest, his expression changed drastically. At that moment, he felt as if there were countless sharp swords stabbing at him. The feeling of being pierced by thousands of swords shocked him greatly. He screamed and collapsed to the ground with a plop. His face was pale and his forehead was covered in sweat. Do these new disciples really think that the swords in the forest of 1,000 swords are so easy to obtain? Back then, I only managed to obtain one sword on my second attempt. An old disciple could not help but laugh when he saw this. Next. Elder Qing He's tone was indifferent, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. This young man's cultivation was good, but his understanding of swords was too shallow. The new disciple's face was full of shame as he retreated. Seeing this scene, the excited new disciples felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over their heads. Their expressions instantly turned solemn. Only Yuan Mie's eyes, which were as still as night, did not move at all. After the disciple who failed, there were also disciples who took turns to enter the 10,000 sword forest. However, the result was that at most 1 out of 10 people successfully obtained a sword. Among them, the most talented person only resonated with hundreds of longswords. This scene made the faces of the elders who came to watch the ceremony and had the intention of taking in disciples turn as black as the bottom of a pot. How can these new disciples fight against the limitless sword sect and the disciples of the Sun Moon Hall? Elder Gu Tuo snorted in disappointment. Next. Elder Qing, he said casually. Yuan Mie took a step forward. In an instant, the entire valley quieted down. Everyone's eyes were focused on Yuan Mie. As a disciple of the dynasty, Yuan Mie did not choose to join the Saint Origin Academy. Instead, he entered the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. A large part of the reason was that Prince Yuani had joined the Saint Origin Academy. However, the main reason was that Yuan Mie wanted a true opponent in the Sword Dao. You are not here yet, Yuan Mie thought to himself. However, at this moment, not far from the valley, 2 figures finally arrived. The young man was dressed in a black robe. He was tall and handsome with a calm and reserved temperament. The young girl was as elegant as a lotus. She had bright eyes and white teeth. It was Yi Guqin and Mu Xingzu. It's Sword Sect Yi. Is he Yi Guqin? He's so handsome. Many female disciples had hearts in their eyes. What's the use of looks? The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest respects strength. If the Sword Sect is really crippled, it will be difficult for them to establish themselves in the inner court. I wonder if the Sword Sect can obtain a famous sword in the 1,000 Sword Forest. It's hard to say. After all, it's difficult to use skills without true energy. With the arrival of Yi Guqin, the quiet atmosphere became lively again. Whether it was the new disciples or the old disciples, even the inner court disciples and elders, they all looked over. Yi Guqin didn't care about these gazes. Instead, he looked at Yuan Mie. He was also a little surprised that Yuan Mie would choose to join the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Sword Sect Yi Guqin, you could have been a very good opponent. Unfortunately. Yuan Mie shook his head slightly. He didn't have any intention of mocking Yi Guqin. He just felt that it was a pity. Because there was one less opponent. Yi Guqin had a good impression of Yuan Mie. When Yi Guqin was surrounded by Xia Yubing, Prince Yuani, and the others, Yuan Mie helped him. But Yi Guqin knew that Yuan Mie only wanted to use him. He and Yuan Mie would never be able to confide in each other. They would only be rivals. But such an opponent was much better than Murong Ditian, Prince Yuani, and the others. Perhaps I might not be unable to be your opponent, Yi Guqin said with an inexplicable tone. But before Yuan Mie could say anything, a noisy voice that made Yi Guqin frown sounded again. Interesting. Yuan Mie is at the peak of the 9th cycle of qi refinement and a genius who comprehended the dark sword intent. But you're already a cripple. How can the two be compared? The person who spoke was Qin Lin. Chapter 244. Qin Lin sneered. She didn't think Yi Guqin would dare to show up here. In a place like the Forest of 10,000 Swords, only a few disciples with true energy could obtain swords, let alone someone who didn't even have true energy. Therefore, Qin Lin mocked Yi Guqin without hesitation as if she had found his sore spot. However, Yuan Mie didn't even pay attention to Qin Lin's words. Yi Guqin's eyes turned cold. He didn't see Qin Lin as an opponent, because he felt that even attacking her would be an insult to himself. However, Yi Guqin was annoyed by Qin Lin's repeated provocations. Mu Xingzu, who was beside Yiguchen, saw Yiguchen's cold face and her heart tightened. She clenched her teeth and glared at Qinlin. Qinlin, what right do you have to talk about senior brother Yi? Oh, how am I not qualified? Am I not telling the truth? Qinlin, sneered and didn't take it to heart. Can you kill 3 heaven's favorites at the elite gathering? Can you kill Xia Yubing, who inherited the Sword King's inheritance? Are you able to face the oppression of 3 spirit bridges of heaven and earth cultivators in the Qi refinement realm? Can you still have the courage to draw your sword when facing the heaven's favorites of the Starry Sword Pavilion? No, you can't. Therefore, you will never be able to compare with senior brother Yi. You can only look at his back. Mu Xingzu shouted with all her strength. The entire area outside the valley fell silent. Even those who had originally looked down on Yiguchen had a complicated and ashamed look in their eyes at this moment. They couldn't do what Yiguchen did at the elite gathering. You. Qinlin's face turned purple, but she couldn't say anything. Because she couldn't do any of these. What's the use of having a sharp tongue? Can your senior brother Yi obtain a famous sword in the forest of 1,000 swords? Can he trigger the resonance of the swords? Qinlin, snorted coldly and feigned civility. Xingzhu believes in senior martial brother Yi. Mu Xingzu didn't back down. Why bother? If a dog barks at you, are you going to scold it back? Yiguchen looked at Mu Xingzu with a trace of tenderness in the depths of his eyes. He reached out and rubbed her head. Mu Xingzu's pretty face was flushed red, and her heart was pounding, but she felt inexplicably happy. You, Qinlin, bit her lips and didn't say anything else. Her face was cold as she waited for Yiguchen to enter the forest of 10,000 swords. Over here, Yuan Mia finally stepped into the myriad sword forest. Instantly, the sword chi in the forest of 10,000 swords shot up into the sky. However, in the face of this, Yuan Mia did not retreat at all. His expression did not even change. He is indeed a good seedling. Even Elder Qing, he sighed. Looks like Yuan Mia won't disappoint us. Elder Gu Tua nodded with a smile. At the same time, he looked at Yiguchen from the corner of his eye with a trace of contempt. As if vaguely sensing Elder Gu Tuo's gaze, Yiguchen frowned slightly. From the side, Chu Qingqi walked up and said to Yiguchen in a low voice, Elder Gu Tuo is from the First Elder's faction. I see. Yiguchen came to a realization. Since he was from the First Elder's faction, it was natural that he didn't like him. Yuan Mia has already walked into the depths of the forest of 10,000 swords. Will he obtain the mystical weapon of the past sect masters? A disciple exclaimed. At this moment, everyone's gaze was focused on Yuan Mia, who was walking step by step into the depths of the forest of 10,000 swords. Buzz buzz buzz, suddenly, the long swords in the forest of 10,000 swords seemed to faintly resonate. 1 sword, 2 swords, 100 swords, 200 swords, the swords are resonating. Yuan Mia has triggered the swords to resonate, many people cried out. In the end, a total of 2,000 swords resonated and emitted sword hums that scattered the clouds in the sky. Is this Yuan Mia's limit? Many elders were paying close attention. At this moment, everyone felt a cold and deathly still sword intent spreading out from the depths of the forest of 10,000 swords. Darkness sword intent, everyone thought at the same time. Yuan Mia used the darkness sword intent, causing the swords to resonate even more intensely. 3,000 swords, 4000 swords, in the end, a total of 4,500 long swords resonated. The sword chi that spread out caused the entire valley to tremble and even spread outside the valley. This unforeseen event attracted even more disciples to the forest of 10,000 swords. When they discovered that it was Yuan Mia, they were all shocked. In the end, the sword chi of the forest of 10,000 swords soared into the sky. Amidst the trembling and buzzing, Yuan Mia, dressed in black, slowly walked out. He held a pitch-black long sword in his hand. It was covered in spiritual inscriptions and emitted a hidden sharpness. It's a mystical weapon named Silent Night. Not to mention the senior disciples, even the elders who were watching couldn't help but speak. This was one of the few mystical weapons in the depths of the forest of 10,000 swords. It was extremely precious. Ha, Yuan Mie's ability is indeed not bad. I intend to take him as my disciple. What do you think? Elder Gu Tuo laughed. This Gu Tuo. Elder Qing he frowned slightly. Elder Qing he was from Yan Changa's faction, while Gu Tuo was from the First Elder's faction. If Gu Tuo really took Yuan Mia as his disciple, wouldn't he be absorbing new blood for the First Elder's faction? The selection of swords in the forest of 10,000 swords isn't over yet. Who knows, there might be someone more outstanding than Yuan Mia. Elder Qing he said with deep meaning. Yuan Mia's result is already second only to Yan Wushuang. Or do you think that the sword sect will be more talented than Yan Wushuang? Elder Gu Tuo chuckled. Who knows? Let's wait and see. Elder Qing he flicked his sleeves. Yuan Mia, who had obtained the solitary night sword, stood at the periphery and did not leave. He was still waiting for someone. After the Yuan annihilation, many disciples entered one after another to choose their swords. However, such a shocking scene never appeared again. After all, among the new disciples who possessed sword intent, only Yuan Mia and Yi Guqin were present. Last one, Elder Qing he said. Yi Guqin smiled faintly and stepped out slowly. He was the latest to enter, so he was naturally the last to enter. As soon as Elder Qing he's words left his mouth, the noisy atmosphere fell silent. Everyone's gaze was on Yi Guqin. If Yi Guqin had not been poisoned by the spirit-devouring worm, they might have great expectations. They might even think that Yi Guqin might be comparable to Yan Wushuang. However, Yi Guqin did not emit any vital energy from his body, which made many people feel uncertain. With the Yuan Mia pearl in front of them, even if Yi Guqin's performance was slightly worse, it would be disappointing. Heh! It's time to make a fool of himself. Qin Lin seemed to have expected the result. The corners of her mouth had already curled up into a faint smile. Senior brother Yi, you can do it. Mu Xingzu clenched her fists. She had always firmly believed in Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin, let me see if you are qualified to be my opponent, Yuan Mia muttered. Chu Qingqi, Elder Qing He, Elder Gu Tuo, and many other disciples all held their breaths. At this moment, Yi Guqin was the center of attention and received everyone's attention. Would the once rising sword sect completely fall into silence? Perhaps this time, he would be able to see some clues. Ha! Forest of myriad swords. I'm really looking forward to it. Yi Guqin smiled faintly and stepped into the forest. With one step, the wind and clouds surged. Chapter 245. As Yi Guqin stepped into the forest of 10,000 swords. The entire forest of 10,000 swords seemed to tremble slightly as if there was a sign. Buzz! Buzz! Many long swords trembled and shone with cold light. Streaks of sword radiance tore through the air and swept towards Yi Guqin. The forest of 10,000 swords was filled with countless sword qi. Anyone who stepped into it would be attacked by the sword qi. Seeing this, the people outside stared at Yi Guqin. They wanted to see how he would get out of this situation. However, Yi Guqin just smiled in the face of the sword qi. The blood in his body surged. Vaguely, there seemed to be countless golden Sanskrit characters emerging from his body, accompanied by the chants of the Buddhas. It was the indestructible body of Vajra. With a flick of Yi Guqin's finger, the air exploded and the sword qi was completely destroyed. This. The spectating disciples were in an uproar, and their minds were greatly shaken. They did not expect Yi Guqin to have such a strong physical body that he could destroy the sword qi with his bare hands. The physical strength of the sword master is indeed strong. Elder Qing he said with a smile. Previously, at the elite meeting, Yi Guqin had used his physical body to resist the spiritual inscription weapon and it had caused quite a stir. The physical strength is just an outer Tao. Without true energy, you are powerless. Although Elder Gu Tuo was shocked, he was still disdainful. Qin Lin gritted her teeth and did not say anything. However, it was obvious that Yi Guqin's physical strength had shocked her. At least, putting true energy aside, Qin Lin felt that Yi Guqin could defeat her with his physical strength alone. Of course, Qin Lin would not admit it. So what if you have physical strength? There is a limit. Without true energy, how can you reach the depths of the forest of 10,000 swords? Qin Lin thought to herself. Boom. 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 Yi Guqin stepped into the depths of the forest and the sword chi around him could no longer threaten him. My invincible Vajra body is enough to contend against an ordinary divine soul realm expert. This level of sword chi is no threat to me. On the contrary, the deeper I go, the stronger the pressure of the sword chi becomes. Yi Guqin thought to himself. Tens of thousands of swords gathered together. That kind of biting cold pressure was not something that ordinary people could withstand. As such, many disciples were intimidated from the very start. Their faces paled as they fell to the ground, unable to get up. However, this kind of sword pressure did not have much effect on Yi Guqin. In terms of understanding of the sword, no one could compare to the sword demon. Until now, Yi Guqin has not triggered the resonance of the sword. He has only broken through with his physical strength. He is just a boorish man. Qin Lin was merciless and mocked him loudly. When many people heard this, they immediately frowned, but they couldn't refute it. Could it be that Yi Jianzong can only rely on the power of his physical body to forcefully break through? How is that possible? Even a divine soul realm expert can't break through by force. Unless he resonates with the sword, it's impossible to reach the deepest part of the forest of 10,000 swords. Some experienced senior disciples said. Yi Guqin, is that all you can do? Yuan Mia was slightly disappointed. He had resonated with 4,500 swords, but Yi Guqin hadn't even resonated with one. The gap was too big. He wasn't qualified to be his opponent at all. Elder Qing He, Chu Qingqi, and the others were also muttering in their hearts. They were somewhat puzzled. Qing He, is this the sword master Yi Guqin that you think can surpass Yuan Mia and Yan Wushuang? Elder Gu Tuo laughed. The contempt in his eyes couldn't be erased. Looking at the guesses, doubts, and contempt in the eyes of many elders and disciples, Mu Xingzu felt extremely uncomfortable. This feeling was even more uncomfortable than the contempt and humiliation she felt. Because Yi Guqin was her vision and role model. Mu Xingzu's eyes flashed with tears. She gritted her teeth and shouted, I believe that senior brother Yi can definitely resonate with the swords and surpass everyone else. This sudden shout caused everyone to be stunned. Qin Lin shook her head and laughed. Ridiculous. However, Mu Xingzu's shout was also transmitted to Yi Guqin in the forest of 10,000 swords. He sighed slightly. At this point, it was difficult to go further with the invincible Vajra body. If that's the case, in the next moment, Yi Guqin took another step forward. The golden light on his body dissipated. Without the support of the invincible Vajra body, the surrounding sword chi surrounded him again. Has Sword Master Yi given up? All the elders and disciples were puzzled. They didn't understand why Yi Guqin did this. I once buried swords in the sword tomb and nourished swords with fresh blood. Since you are swords, how can you hurt me? Yi Guqin took a step forward, and there was a loud bang. A mysterious concept pervaded the air. It was Yi Guqin's enlightened sword heart concept. Those whistling sword chi that swept toward Yi Guqin actually directly penetrated Yi Guqin's body and didn't cause any harm to Yi Guqin. How is this possible? Elder Gu Tuo, Elder Qing He, Chu Qingqi, Qin Lin, Mu Xingzu, Yuan Mia, at this moment, everyone held their breaths. The scene that Yiguchen brought to them was too shocking. Not only that, those sword chi actually began to revolve around Yiguchen as if they had found their master. At the same time, accompanied by a sword cry. A spirit longsword began to vibrate as if it was being summoned by resonance. However, it was the second sword, the third sword. With every step that Yiguchen took, those long swords that were stuck in the ground trembled wherever he passed. It was as if they were welcoming the King of Swords. Enlightened sword heart, its enlightened sword heart. Elder Qing, he stared for a long time before speaking with a trace of shock. Enlightened sword heart. When these 4 words landed in everyone's ears, the shock it brought was no different from the roar of thunder. As disciples of the sect that focused on sword cultivation, they naturally knew what enlightened sword heart meant. It was a state that only a true sword master could comprehend. It's actually enlightened sword heart. Currently, in our sword sect's forest of pagodas, it seems that only sect leader Yen and Lord Feng have comprehended it. Even senior sister Yen hasn't reached that state yet. An old disciple said with a dazed expression. No, impossible. Qin Lin bit her lips so hard that it was about to bleed, as if she couldn't believe everything before her eyes. 500 swords. 1,000 swords. 2,000 swords. 5,000 swords. Yiguchen stepped out step by step, and the sword hummed with each step, directly causing the 5,000 swords to resonate. Powerful swords soared into the sky, scattering the clouds in the sky, and the earth was trembling. It shook half of the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. Such a shocking scene was only achieved by Yen Wushuang, who was previously number 1 in the inner yard. At this moment, the emotions in everyone's hearts were indescribable. Yiguchen, you really didn't disappoint me. Yuan Mie's dead eyes revealed a strange light. He had only triggered 4,500 swords, and Yiguchen had already surpassed him. As expected of Sword Master Yi, he actually reached senior sister Yan's level. 5,000 swords resonating, it's simply unbelievable. Many disciples praised, and the doubts from before instantly disappeared like smoke. Ha, Elder Gu Tua, may I ask how talented Yiguchen is now? Elder Qing, he couldn't help but chuckle. Humph, it's only 5,000 swords, the same level as Yen Wushuang. But he has no true qi at all, and his realm in the future might not compare to Yen Wushuang. Elder Gu Tua snorted coldly, but one could hear the reluctance in it. Very clearly, the resonance of 5,000 swords also made Elder Gu Tua extremely surprised. However, was it just like that? Located in the depths of the myriad sword forest, the corners of Yiguchen's mouth seemed to curl into a hint of a faintly discernible smile. He was the sword master. He was the sword demon. Resonating with 5,000 swords was not his limit. Hard and soft sword intent, come out. Within Yiguchen's body, a profound sword intent spread out once more. Following the appearance of this sword intent, there were thousands of swords resonating again. Again, Azura sword intent. Yiguchen gave a low cry, and a blood-colored sword intent burst out from his body. Although there was no true chi augmentation, this sword intent was like an Azura coming into being, shaking the firmament and wind. Bang! A massive illusory blood river appeared. At the same time, an extremely illusory 18 levels of blood prison appeared. This scene shocked all the spectating disciples. As Yiguchen brought out 2 great sword intents at the same time, the myriad sword forest was completely stirred up. Countless sword chimes eventually converged into a monstrous torrent that shook everyone's eardrums. Buzz! 7,000 swords. 8,000 swords. 10,000 swords. With a loud boom, all the swords in the myriad sword forest chimed at the same time at this moment. It was as if they were welcoming the sword monarch, as if Yiguchen was born to be a sword cultivator that ruled over 10,000 swords. This wave also spread out of the myriad sword forest and to the surroundings, and finally, the entire Sword Whisper mountain range was shaken. The simultaneous chimes of 10,000 swords shook heaven and earth. Chapter 246. All the onlookers froze on the spot, and their hearts were filled with indescribable shock. Regardless of whether it was the elders, the elites of the inner court, or the outer court disciples, they were all the same. A thick sense of shock froze on their faces. Their eyes revealed deep shock that could not be concealed. The 10,000 swords chimed in unison, shaking the heavens and the earth, and stirring up the clouds in the 9 heavens. What a shocking scene! The 10,000 swords chimed in unison in the forest of 10,000 swords. This has never happened before. Elder Ching He's eyes shone brightly as he exclaimed. The smile on Elder Gu Tuo's face froze as well. No matter how much he looked down on Yiguchen, he could not say a word at this moment. His mouth was slightly open as if he could not accept it. Xingzhu knew that senior brother Yi was still the master swordsman who ruled the world with his sword. At this moment, the longing in Mu Xingzhu's eyes became even more intense, and it even turned into deep obsession and worship. This scene was branded in her heart, and she would never forget it. However, at this moment, the one who was in the most disbelief was Qin Lin. No, impossible. He doesn't have true energy, and his cultivation is crippled. How can he cause the 10,000 swords to chime in unison? Qin Lin, was in disbelief, and her charming face was pale. Her vicious tongue, her craftiness, and her ridicule had all turned into bitterness and trembling at this moment. They were stuck in her throat and could not be released. Until now, Qin Lin, finally knew why Yiguchen did not respond to her provocation. Would a lion care about the barking of a jackal? In Yiguchen's eyes, Qin Lin, did not exist at all. Therefore, Yiguchen did not even bother to make a move himself. If he made a move, it would be easy for him to teach Qin Lin, who was in the 9th cycle of Qi refinement realm, a lesson. The funny thing was that Qin Lin, thought that she could threaten or even defeat Yiguchen with her strength. Ha! Yiguchen, is this where your confidence comes from? At this moment, even Qin Lin, felt powerless in her heart. At the same time, she clenched her silver teeth tightly. She felt an unprecedented sense of defeat. She even felt that she had been a joke in Yiguchen's eyes since the beginning. The change in Wan Jianlin caused the entire swordsmanship-seeking mountain range to come back to life. The cloud-like spiritual energy swept out like a tide, causing many mountain ranges to shake. At this moment, those inner academy elites and elders who had not come to the 10,000 Swords Forest and were quietly training in various parts of the inner academy also felt this shock. At the same time, they also sensed Wan Jianlin's soaring sword aura. The vibration is coming from the 10,000 Swords Forest. Who could cause such a resonance? Even that girl, Yan Wushuang, could only cause half of the mountain range to tremble. Could it be Yuan Mia or the Sword Sect? Some of the elders were bewildered. They immediately came out of seclusion and headed to the forest of 10,000 swords to observe. On the second peak of the inner court, a man sat cross-legged on a huge rock under a pine tree that welcomed guests. The man was dressed in white and had an outstanding appearance. He had an otherworldly temperament. There was not much fluctuation around him, but the restrained feeling gave him a more oppressive and dangerous feeling than Li Lingxiao, who was showing off his ability. No disciple of the Sword Sect Pagoda was unfamiliar with this person. It was Bai Zichen, who was ranked second in the inner academy. At this moment, Bai Zichen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, also felt the vibration. He suddenly opened his eyes, and there seemed to be sword aura flashing through his eyes. He stood up from the huge rock and looked at the forest of 10,000 swords in the distance. Who could it be? Yuan Mia or the Sword Sect? Bai Zichen muttered to himself. Not to mention that the entire Sword Sect Pagoda was shaken by the vibration of the forest of 10,000 swords. At this moment, Yiguchin had already reached the deepest part of the forest of 10,000 swords. The people outside the valley could not see the scene here. This is the deepest part of the forest of 10,000 swords, Yiguchin muttered. Although the forest of 10,000 swords forest was filled with countless sword auras, they could no longer cause him any harm. This was because Yiguchin's understanding and comprehension of the sword had already reached an extremely profound level. Famous swords had spirits and chose their masters. In the forest of 10,000 swords, almost all the swords were vibrating, as if they were waiting for Yiguchin to choose. Those swords should be the mystical weapon left behind by the previous sect masters, Yiguchin looked over. In the deepest part of the forest of 10,000 swords, the surroundings had become empty. There were only 7 or 8 swords that were each inserted in a different place, as if they were too powerful and could not get too close. Yiguchin looked forward and saw that every one of them was a mystical weapon, emitting a powerful spirit pattern formation fluctuation. Silent Knight of Yuan Mia should also be one of these swords, Yiguchin muttered. The Calamity Dust sword was shattered, and the Meteor Soft sword mainly walked the path of a soft sword. He also needed a backup sword now. However, after scanning around, Yiguchin frowned slightly. Among these mystical weapons, he did not find the sword that he liked. It was said that famous swords chose their masters. As a sword cultivator, he would naturally choose a sword that suited him. Although the mystical weapon used by the previous sect masters had a powerful aura and could cut through gold and jade, it was not suitable for Yiguchin. If it was not suitable, Yiguchin would rather not choose it. Am I really that unlucky? Yiguchin could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. However, when he looked around again, he realized that in the deepest part of the forest of 10,000 swords, there was another sword that was inserted into a raised mound. The reason why Yiguchin noticed this sword was because all the swords in the forest of 10,000 swords were vibrating, but this sword was as silent as an abyss and did not move at all. This piqued Yiguchin's interest. Yiguchin slowly walked to the mound and stared at the pitch-black sword. With one look, Yiguchin raised his eyebrows slightly. This sword was extremely wide and heavy. The pitch-black sword was as thick as a shield. At the same time, there were no traces of spiritual inscriptions on the sword. In other words, this sword was not a mystical weapon. Most importantly, this sword had not even been sharpened. The blade was very blunt and heavy. Yiguchin suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. This sword was too similar to the dark iron heavy sword that he had buried in the sword tomb. Yiguchin suddenly looked at the hilt of this sword. There were 2 ancient words carved on it. Dark Underworld. Xian Cultivator, Heaven. Underworld Cultivator, Earth. Dark Underworld, which meant that this sword could carry the weight of heaven and earth. This sword is called the Dark Underworld Heavy Sword. Yiguchin's eyes suddenly lit up. Among the 4 sword principles that he had comprehended in his previous life, the edgeless sword principle was comprehended from the dark iron heavy sword. The heavy sword was edgeless. Great craftsmanship. If I get this dark underworld heavy sword, it might be an opportunity to comprehend the edgeless sword principle. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. The edgeless sword principle was the same as the Azura sword principle. It was a peerless sword principle. Once Yiguchin comprehended the edgeless sword essence, the heavy sword would be able to defeat 10 people with brute force. It would be like the weight of Mount Tai. It could even form a gravitational field with the power to destroy 10,000 soldiers. Furthermore, the edgeless sword essence could be like the void sword technique. It could produce a vibrating sword wave that could penetrate defense. That kind of power could render most defense ineffective. I'll choose this sword. Yiguchin took a step forward and extended his hand to grab the hilt. He was about to pull it out. Chapter 247. Yiguchin was surprised to find that he couldn't pull out the Xianming heavy sword. Again. Yiguchin wasn't discouraged. The blood in his body surged, and the surface of his skin shone with a golden light. He performed the indestructible body of Vajra. However, he still couldn't pull it out. It's so heavy. Yi Guchen was surprised. Although he had a feeling that the Xianming heavy sword might be heavy, he didn't expect it to be so heavy that he couldn't even pull it out. Yi Guchen activated the blood in his body again and unleashed the dracophant power of his perfect body. Rise! Yi Guchen's divine power exploded, and the ground under his feet already had cracks spreading. However, the Xianming heavy sword still didn't move, like a stabilizing needle. I really don't know what material this sword is made of. It's actually so heavy. If I can pull it out, even without using any extra power, I'm afraid I can directly injure a divine soul realm expert. Yi Guchen couldn't help but sigh. He finally understood that if he wanted to pull out the sword, he had to at least break through to the divine soul realm and unseal his sea of qi. At that time, the dracophant power, genuine qi, soul power, and even totem power would explode at the same time. Only then would he be able to pull out the Xianming heavy sword. If that's the case, then I'll wait until I break through to the divine soul realm to take this sword. Yi Guchen thought in his heart, but he didn't feel that it was a pity. As a disciple with a purple gold token, it wasn't impossible for him to come to the Wan Jianlin to choose a sword again in the future. This Xianming heavy sword was already something that Yi Guchen was determined to get. If he could get this sword, Yi Guchen would have a chance to comprehend the edgeless sword essence. At that time, Yi Guchen's strength would soar again with 3 sword essences, and at the same time, it would shock everyone. Yi Guchen turned around and was about to leave the place. However, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. It's a rare opportunity for Wan Jianlin to choose a sword. Although I have no fate with these mystical runic weapons, I can still give one to Mu Xingzu. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He walked up to the few mystical rune divine weapons and chose the one that was most suitable for Mu Xingzu, pulling it out. To other people, it was almost impossible for them to come into contact with mystical runic weapons. However, to Yi Guchen, it was something that he could easily pull out. Yi Guchen could even feel the sword in his hand vibrating violently, as if it was an honor to be chosen by him. Yi Guchen shook his head and smiled, before he walked out of the Thousand Swords Forest. At this moment, everyone outside the 10,000 Swords Forest was staring intently at the entrance. Why hasn't Sword Sekyi appeared yet? It's been so long. He should be choosing a sword that suits him. Many disciples were discussing among themselves, their faces filled with curiosity. After all, this was the first time in the history of the Myriad Swords Forest that the myriad swords chimed. Even the number 1 in the inner yard, Yan Wushuang, was not at this level. Therefore, many people were looking forward to what kind of sword Yi Guchen would take out. Could it be that it's just a facade? Seeing that Yi Guchen had not come out for a long time, Qin Lin felt lucky. She did not wish for Yi Guchen's reputation to grow in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. However, as the figure walked out step by step, Qin Lin's last bit of hope was completely extinguished. Sword Sekyi has come out. He took out a sword. It's a mystical runic weapon. Elder Qing, he exclaimed softly. Obviously, the sword that Yi Guchen took out was the same as the Silent Night of Yuanmie. It was also a mystical runic weapon. As expected of Yi Guchen from the sword sect. Even if his true qi was crippled, he still caused the 10,000 swords to ring and took out a mystical runic weapon. Who else in the sword sect Pagoda Forest has such ability? Many disciples who admired Yi Guchen to begin with felt even more respect for Yi Guchen. He was the role model of a sword cultivator. Qin Lin's face was ashen. She did not even dare to breathe loudly. She was a completely different person from her previous arrogant and presumptuous appearance. No matter how arrogant she was and how much she looked down on Yi Guchen, she understood now. If she did not break through to the divine soul realm, she would not have the qualifications to challenge Yi Guchen. Even if she did, she would only be asking for a rebuff. Senior brother Yi. Seeing Yi Guqin take out a mystical runic weapon, Mu Xingzu was even happier than she was when she got it. Yi Guqin looked at Mu Xingzu and casually tossed the mystical runic weapon to Mu Xingzu. Xingzhu, since you're learning the sword by my side, I don't have much to give you. I'll give you this mystical runic weapon. Half a month later, it'll help you take first place. Mu Xingzu subconsciously caught the sword. Her expression was still blank. She looked rather adorable and adorable. Senior brother Yi, this. Mu Xingzu did not seem to be able to react. Her mind was still blank for a moment. Mu Xingzu was not the only one who was stunned. All the disciples who participated in the sword selection were also stunned. They risked their lives to enter the forest of 10,000 swords, but it was difficult for them to get a sword. In the end, Yi Guqin gave away the mystical runic weapon the moment he came out. Moreover, he gave it away so casually without any hesitation. The difference between people was simply too great. Qing He, Gu Tuo, and some other elders were also stunned. This was the first time they had seen Yi Guqin do something like this. One must know that mystical runic weapons were extremely rare. It was hard for an ordinary super family to even come across one. Moreover, it was a weapon left behind by the sect leaders of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest. It was even more precious than ordinary mystical runic weapons. In the end, Yi Guqin gave it away so easily. This was a little too extravagant. Among the crowd, Qin Lin's emotions fluctuated the most. She bit her lips tightly with her jade teeth, and her eyes were filled with jealousy. That's right, jealousy. She was jealous that Mu Xingzu could obtain a mystical runic weapon from Yi Guqin. Even with her resources as a super family's disciple, she only had a mystical runic weapon. The difference between the two was huge. A mystical runic weapon could greatly increase the strength of the wielder. Damn it, that Yi Guqin is really wasting resources. Qin Lin's eyes were red with jealousy. She could not wait to snatch it away. However, her rationality told her that she would only embarrass herself if she did that. On the other hand, Mu Xingzu was still a little dizzy. She felt as if she had been hit by a pie that fell from the sky. Senior brother Yi, this is a divine weapon that you took out. How can I accept it? Mu Xingzu also knew how precious this mystical runic weapon was. Hence, she asked anxiously. I asked you to accept it, so accept it. If you can win, that will be the greatest repayment to me. Yi Guqin smiled faintly. If Mu Xingzu could win, she would be able to obtain the Heaven-Earth variant thunder for him. This was very important to Yi Guqin. Xingzhu will definitely win. Mu Xingzu's heart was filled with happiness. Even her eyes were slightly red. Yi Guqin nodded. This scene was seen by many female disciples. They were all extremely envious of Mu Xingzu. At the same time, they looked at Yi Guqin with hearts in their eyes. After today, Yi Guqin will probably have a firm foothold in our Sword Sect's forest of pagodas. At the very least, he won't be easily looked down upon because his cultivation has been crippled. Elder Qing He smiled with relief. The 10,000 sword chime was the best proof of Yi Guqin's talent in the sword Dao. However, at this moment, Elder Gu Tuo's expression was uncertain. He suddenly took a step forward and said in a clear voice, Yi Guqin, I intend to take you as my disciple. Follow me. The moment Elder Gu Tuo said this, it immediately caused another uproar. It was extremely rare for an elder to take the initiative to take in a disciple. It was an opportunity that many disciples could not obtain even if they begged for it. They looked at Yi Guqin with envy. However, there was not a trace of joy on Yi Guqin's face. Instead, he frowned. He pondered for a moment and said, Thank you for your kind intentions, elder. However, I have my own path of sword Dao. There's no need to follow anyone. As soon as Yi Guqin finished speaking, all the noise stopped abruptly. Chapter 248. The outer court disciples, including the inner court disciples, were all dumbfounded. An elder taking the initiative to take in a disciple was an opportunity that could not be obtained even if one begged for it. Many inner court disciples who were ranked at the bottom were not willing to be taken in as disciples by elders. However, Elder Gu Tuo had taken the initiative to take in a disciple but was rejected by Yi Guchen. In the eyes of everyone, this was not only a rejection but also an embarrassment to Elder Gu Tuo. As expected, after hearing Yi Guchen's words, Elder Gu Tuo's face immediately darkened. Yi Guchen rejecting an elder in front of so many people was undoubtedly a slap to his face. Yi Guchen, do you know what you're talking about? This is an opportunity that no one else can obtain. I'll say it again. Are you willing to be my disciple? Elder Gu Tuo took a step forward and a faint pressure attacked Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen and the others took 2 steps back and frowned, not saying a word. Senior brother Yi. Mu Xingzu was also affected by the pressure. Her face was pale but she stayed by Yi Guchen's side. Gu Tuo, you're going too far. Elder Qing he frowned and also took a step forward to dissolve the pressure. Yi Guchen, your cultivation is crippled but you can still trigger the 10,000 sword chime. You really surprised me. It's also an honor for you to be my disciple. How dare you reject me? Elder Gu Tuo's voice was filled with anger. A dark light flashed in Yi Guchen's eyes. How could he not know that Gu Tuo was a member of the First Elder's faction? Not only had he triggered the 10,000 sword chime, but he had also taken out a divine rune weapon. To the First Elder's faction, he had naturally become a thorn in their side. The First Elder was quite displeased that Yi Guchen had monopolized the Venerable One's cave abode. Under such circumstances, how could Yi Guchen agree to become Gu Tuo's disciple? Even if Gu Tuo did not have any ill intentions, Yi Guchen would still not agree. Because Yi Guchen did not need anyone to teach him. I'm sorry. Thank you for your kind intentions, Elder Gu Tuo. However, I, Yi Guchen, am well aware of my own sword Dao path. There's no need to trouble you, Elder. Yi Guchen directly refused. This caused the surrounding group of disciples to whisper to each other. There were those who admired Yi Guchen's courage, those who were puzzled and regretful, and those who were secretly mocking him. Yi Guchen, are you saying that I don't have the qualifications to guide you on the path of the sword? Elder Gu Tuo's eyes sank completely, his face frosty. The speaker has no intention, but the listener has the heart. In Elder Gu Tuo's eyes, these words represented Yi Guchen's provocation. Yi Guchen shook his head slightly when he heard this. He could not even be bothered to explain and directly said, if Elder Gu Tuo insists on thinking this way, then so be it. How dare you? Yi Guchen, do you think you can ignore everyone just because you've caused the resonance of 10,000 swords? You have to know that you're just a cripple whose true qi has been crippled from the beginning. Elder Gu Tuo was furious when he heard this and directly berated him. Regardless of whether I, Yi Guchen, am crippled or not, I don't need anyone to interfere in my path of the sword. Yi Guchen flicked his sleeve, and his eyes turned cold. He had just arrived at the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest. However, Gu Tuo had repeatedly forced Yi Guchen into a corner. There was no need for Yi Guchen to put on a good face. Good boy, you said that your sword skill has already been perfected and you don't need anyone to teach you, right? Then let me ask you, do you dare to compete with me? Elder Gu Tuo asked forcefully. What? As soon as Elder Gu Tuo said this, everyone in the surroundings was stunned. As an elder, Elder Gu Tuo actually wants to compete with a disciple that's unable to utilize true qi? Isn't this too unfair? This. Mu Xingzu clenched her fists tightly, and she was filled with rage in her heart. Elder Gu Tuo, why don't you make it clear? Yi Guchen had his hands behind his back as he spoke indifferently. He didn't think that Elder Gu Tuo would lower himself and do such a shameless thing. The competition I speak of is one where we won't utilize our true qi or our cultivations to suppress others. We'll purely rely on our own sword techniques to compete. Aren't you extremely confident in your sword Dao? Then do you have the courage to compete with me? Elder Gu Tuo spoke with a proud tone. So that's how it is. The people in the surroundings came to an understanding. What Elder Gu Tuo said was purely a competition of sword techniques, and they couldn't utilize their cultivations. However, this sort of competition was the best way to display a person's sword technique. Between the disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, there would often be such competitions. But now, the one who wanted to compete with Yi Guchen wasn't a disciple of the same level, but an elder. Elder Gu Tuo has always stayed in the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest and immersed himself in the Sword Dao for dozens of years. But how old is this Yi Guchen? Even if he started practicing the sword in his mother's womb, it's only been a dozen years, right? There's no comparison at all. Yeah, no matter how talented Sword Sect Yi is, his age is right there. If it's 10 years later, it might not be a problem for his sword technique to surpass Elder Gu Tuo. But now, it's difficult. Many disciples were secretly whispering. Although Elder Gu Tuo said that they couldn't use their cultivation, this kind of competition was still unfair. Gu Tuo, you're going too far. The time you've been practicing the sword is several times longer than Yi Guchen's age. How can you compare? Elder Qing He also frowned. Gu Tuo ignored Elder Qing He and looked straight at Yi Guchen. How about it, Yi Guchen? If you're timid, I'll take a step back and only use one hand to fight with you. Gu Tuo's tone was indifferent. Being able to say such words proved that he was extremely confident in his sword technique. Yi Guchen was silent. Qin Lin, who didn't even dare to breathe loudly, finally had a trace of relief on her face. However, she didn't dare to mock him anymore. She only thought to herself, Yi Guchen, you're so arrogant. Now you can't get off. Just as Qin Lin, was thinking about this, a smile suddenly appeared on Yi Guchen's face. He said, there's no need for one hand. It won't be good if Elder Gu Tuo is injured. What? Hearing Yi Guchen's words, many people were stunned. For a moment, they thought their ears were playing tricks on them. This. Even Elder Qing He, Chu Qingqi, and other people who cared about Yi Guchen were a little stunned at this moment. They didn't think Yi Guchen was the kind of person who thought highly of himself, but his words were too shocking. His opponent was not a disciple of the same level, but an elder who had been immersed in the sword principle for decades. Good. Good. Yi Guchen, the old me really admires your courage. The Outer Academy Grand Competition is in half a month's time. I heard that you also have a bet with others. In that case, our match will be set after the Outer Academy Grand Competition. Gu Tuo laughed out of extreme anger when he heard this. He directly set the date of the match. Sure. Yi Guchen nodded. Senior brother Yi. Mu Xingzu wanted to say something but stopped. Although she was very confident in Yi Guchen, his opponent this time was an elder after all. Even if he didn't use his cultivation strength, it was almost impossible to defeat him. Yi Guchen, if you lose to me in this duel, I won't ask for much. Kneel down in front of me in front of everyone, kowtow 3 times, and beg me to accept you as my disciple, Gu Tuo said. Okay, but, what if Elder Gu Tuo loses? Yi Guchen asked rhetorically. As soon as he said this, many disciples had a strange look on their faces. Elder Gu Tuo would lose? Even if Yi Guchen was a genius in the sword principle, everyone didn't think that Gu Tuo would lose. This was not a duel at all. I'll lose, ha. Okay, since you said so, I swear that if I lose, I'll also kneel on the ground and kowtow to you 3 times, and I'll acknowledge you as my master. How about that? As soon as Gu Tuo said this, it caused a commotion. An elder acknowledging a disciple as his master was a scene that had never happened before. Moreover, since Gu Tuo could say such a thing, it was obvious that he was very confident in this duel. If he, an inner court elder, lost to a disciple in terms of sword principle realm, that would be unbelievable. Some of the surrounding disciples also shook their heads. This was a duel without any suspense. Yi Guqin, half a month later, I'll personally defeat Mu Xingzu, and Elder Gu Tuo will also defeat you. At that time, under the double blow, I'd like to see how pathetic you'll be. Although Qin Lin, didn't dare to show anything on her face, she was already overjoyed in her heart with a kind of schadenfreude. She was looking forward to seeing Yi Guqin and Mu Xingzu in half a month's time. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin also had a faint smile on his face. A few decades of practicing sword principle. What a joke! No matter how high Gu Tuo's sword principle realm was, could it be higher than Duge Wubai, one of the top 10 peerless masters in the Jianghu who had been practicing sword principle for 40 years? This was simply displaying one slight skill in front of an expert, showing off in front of the ancestor of sword principle. Of course, outsiders naturally didn't know Yi Guqin's secret. They were still sighing and looking at Yi Guqin sympathetically. Even Elder Qing He and Chu Qingqi had complicated expressions. Obviously, they didn't think highly of Yi Guqin. Senior brother Yi, Xingzhu believes in you. Mu Xingzu gathered her courage and stared at Yi Guqin. The result will be clear in half a month, Yi Guqin said casually. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.